So what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about the background of IMEA and how we got here. So IMEA is for the lack of a better term, a nonprofit municipal cooperative of cities that have banded together to ensure that you have a reliable power supply and related services to help the municipal utilities of this state take care of the things you need to take care of. And over those 40 years we've been in business, we have continued to provide stable, reliable, and affordable power supply to our members. And again, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary. One of the things I'm very proud of, and I know our board's very proud of, and so is our staff, is over the last 10 years, and Stacy will talk a little bit about this, that the wholesale power rate, the power supply cost that we're directly responsible for, is actually 5% less today than it was 10 years ago. How many other things in your life can you point back to that your power supply cost is 5% less? Now, if you factor in the transmission cost that you would pay from anybody else, that is on top of that, that's still less than 10% increased cost over those 10 years, so 0.7%. We are the power supplier, the total requirements power supplier, to 32 of the 42 cities that own and operate their own municipal electric system in the state. We serve those of you that have wholesale power supply needs to serve your communities. We don't serve the power supply to Batavia. We don't serve the power supply to Geneva. We don't serve the power supply to Elgin. We don't supply it to Plainfield or anywhere else. We sell it to the citizens of St. Charles, Illinois, and 31 others. You see on the chart there that St. Charles actually signed a contract with IMEA in 2004. St. Charles has actually been a member of IMEA since its founding in 1984. During the first 20 years of that arrangement that St. Charles was on our board, you all purchased your total requirements from, on a wholesale basis, from Commonwealth Edison, who owned the nuclear generators, and they had a cost-based tariff with long-term power supply that most of the communities in this neighborhood bought from them during that period of time. As the markets started to involve the wholesale power markets, in this region it's called PJM, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, PJM power markets were starting to get formed. In 2007, when those markets opened up, Commonwealth Edison, rightfully I think, decided they were going to sell that power into the marketplace to create the best value they could for their shareholders. That's what they did. And they said to you and everybody else involved in that, if you'd like to buy a reliable power supply, you can get that power supply from the PJM market at that point in time. The supply will be there, but the cost will be variable based upon what's going on at that moment in time. So at that point in time, since then, as we all know, Commonwealth Edison is broken apart into several units, Exelon, Commonwealth Edison, and now the owners of the nuclear generators are Constellation. We work with Constellation quite a bit. We do a number of transactions with them on a regular basis. We have a little bit of capacity purchase from them. We have a little bit of energy purchase from them when we need it. But at the same time, what we do know is that Constellation does not offer long-term cost-based resources that would supply you with the same needs that you had over all those many years. So from an IMEA and St. Charles partnership standpoint, you have a direct voice, as Pete alluded to, you have a direct voice into the long-term decisions that IMEA makes, and you have for the last 30 plus years, 40 years as we move along. Your board member is Peter Sewer here, as you well know, your Director of Public Works. Pete has become a leader on our board over the last several years that he's been on our board. We've worked with a number of individuals from your staff, Glenn Ambergy, Mark Keenan, Tom Brule, and now Pete. Your staff does a great job, and from our perspective, and I'm not just saying this, I think St. Charles has a first-class distribution system that serves your customers. And when you start talking about having an average outage rate of 14 minutes per customers per year, that is top of class when it comes to reliability of your distribution system. We work very closely with you to be able to get those things done. Pete has been appointed by this city council at the approval of the mayor, and it ultimately had to be approved by the city council. And we know that Pete gives regular updates on what's going on. We serve 32 cities. We have 32 board members. Everybody that buys power from the IMEA sits on our board. They make those decisions. We also have an executive board, which is made up of 9 of those 32 members. They're really more of for the lack of a better term, something like the committee of the whole, where they actually vet things more deeply, typically the day before the board meeting. We happen to have one this Wednesday. They vet things more deeply in that meeting. Pete's on that executive board, has been for a couple of years. And then on Thursday, the board is the one that ultimately decides and votes on pretty much everything when it comes to the decisions that are made for that. The executive board's power is very limited. It would only be needed if used in an emergency if you couldn't convene the full board on a timely basis, and then those actions would need to be ratified by the full board at the next time the board got put together. The IMEA board meetings provide in-depth financial, legal, and operational reports. I bring this up here. This is my slide deck for my board meeting this Thursday. It's almost 100 pages of PowerPoint slides to go through with the IMEA board about giving regular updates about what's going on, about some opportunities for us to add a significant amount of solar energy to your portfolio, upwards of 150 megawatts, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. And we too are subject to the Open Meetings Act and the Freedom of Information Act, just like you are. We continue to adhere to those. In fact, Stacy Wilson and Troy Fodor are our FOIA and Open Meetings Act officers. So again, the joint action benefits that IMEA provides not only St. Charles but our other 31 communities is power in numbers. You may or may not be familiar with the city of St. Charles peak load is somewhere around 130 megawatts. So as it comes to municipal utilities, that's a reasonably good-sized municipal utility, 130 megawatts. The IMEA is about 1,000 megawatts. So you're about 13% of the load and therefore 13% of the cost that IMEA has, because again, we do that on a nonprofit basis. But when you think about the size of the Commonwealth Edison footprint, it's about 22,000. So you're 130, IMEA is 1,000. The entire ComEd footprint is 22,000. When you take a look at the PJM market as a whole, it's about 150,000 megawatts. So again, having that strength in numbers by working closely with 31 other cities in the state to come up with that 1,000 megawatts of load creates some benefits and that strength in numbers for you. St. Charles, again, has been on our board the entire time that we've made the resource decisions that have provided that stable and affordable power supply for you and all of our members. Having that seat at the table is very important. When it comes to volatility in the marketplace, for the most part, your customers haven't seen that for many, many years. But I do remember on the Christmas of 2022 when we had that negative 35 degrees and 50-mile-an-hour winds, the power markets in the ComEd region were $3,000 a megawatt hour. We had every single power plant we had running full out as much as we could. That month, our power bill to you was about $70 per megawatt hour. $3,000 a megawatt hour was the spot price. Your delivered price was about $70 a megawatt hour, as it is pretty much every month on a regular basis. The advantage of joint action is also in shared cost, shared risk, and shared cost and shared benefit. You share the pain and you share the gain together. So we believe there's lots of benefits that goes along with that. I'm relatively sure you've seen this one before. We'll try not to go through each one of them in great depth. We spend quite a bit of our time and effort dealing with things like NERC is North American Reliability Corporation, cybersecurity issues, continue to work with our communities to help them on that. About 15 years ago, we put together an energy efficiency incentive program. We put $1 million aside every year to give out to retail customers for that. About 130,000 of that, your 13% of that number, 130,000 of that comes to directly payment to the City of St. Charles customers to increase energy efficiency and reduce that usage, because again, the best usage of it is a kilowatt that we don't have to generate, because again, we're doing it for you on a nonprofit basis. That's who we are. On the electric vehicle business, a couple of years ago, we put in a $250,000 incentive. You get 13% of that as well. And that's designed to give incentives to electric vehicle chargers, or in a couple of situations, we have communities that have used that to buy or lease an electric vehicle on behalf of the community to be able to do that. So there's a number of other technical things like grid management services, 24-hour scheduling, 24 hours outage report, of which we talk to Gio and Paul often enough. I'm sure they feel that way, that we talk because it's not uncommon for us to see one of your substations go down. See a big red blob come up from a storm, one of your substations go down, we'll make that contact. Your folks will do the switching, have your folks up relatively quickly. You look on the right-hand side, you see the Green Power Choices, the REC program. One of your retail customers takes advantage of that program through our Green Power Choices. That's something we've had for a number of years. What we also do is we advocate not only for St. Charles, but the cities that own and operate their municipal systems, not only here in the state, but also on a federal level. Stacy and I are fairly involved in a number of the things that the American Public Power Association does. We've been involved in a number of those things, not only on the state region or state basis, but also on the national basis as well. So as Pete alluded to, your current power supply offer runs through September of 2035. Beyond that date, we feel strongly that we offer you the most stable and certain power supply future to continue to carry out those things that you need. One of the things that is different between a municipal utility from power marketers, again, you see that back in 1997 when the state deregulated it, the municipal utilities and the cooperatives continued to keep their service territories and continue to do that on a cost of service basis. One of the things that you continue to have that a power marketer does not have is that long-term obligation to serve. Meaning that no matter what happens, the City of St. Charles will be providing power supply to your customers, even if none of your power plants are working that day. Come hell or high water, the City of St. Charles will be serving your customers, and come hell or high water, IMEA will be doing that at least through 2035. We're planning for the long term, not the next 2 or 3 years. We're planning for the next 10, 20, 30 years in order to help your community continue to provide the services you have. We're member driven, we're directed by our board, and every member has a vote. One thing that I do want to point out is that in 2035, when all of our bonds are paid off, we'll then have had all of our power resources, all of the mortgages on our houses will be paid off. And Stacy's got a graphic that she'll show you here in a little bit. What you'll see there is in 2035, that a drop of 25%. And the question I've got from other communities, how do you know your costs can drop by 25% in 2035? Well, this year, our debt service payments or our mortgage payments are $89 million. Our budget is $355 million. If you don't have to make those $89 million in house payments in 2036, the 355 drops down to 265. You get that roughly $90 million. You still have the same load. You still have the same resources. You're able to cut that cost. 89 into 355 is roughly 25%. So something to be thinking about from that end. From an organizational standpoint, the IMEA has never been in better financial shape, and it's in 40 years of existence. Our long-term portfolio has continued to bring value to our members for many years. We look at things for the long term and look for long-term stability. We have member-owned and member-controlled resources as well. Looking at all the various power supply programs that we have and the various resources that we have, you also have a very affordable and professional management staff that carries this out. And I've got copies of our annual report. They're all available online for the last 10 years. Our annual report shows, and we just completed one this coming year, that we just completed one for the fiscal year we just got done. And that shows that our administrative and general cost is 2.9% of the entire cost of power supply. When you compare that to other options that you have out there, whether that's another joint action agency, a marketer, or staff doing those things, the cost of doing that at 2.9% of what you pay the IMEA would be very challenging to overcome. And the last thing that I want to point out on this one is that IMEA has the highest financial ratings of any power supplier in the state of Illinois. We're rated by Moody's at A+, and we're rated by Fitch at AA-. There are not very many utilities in this country that are rated as high as AA-, but we're the highest in the state. And again, the website's there. It's pretty easy to remember, imea.org. So as you look forward to your next set of power generation and this contract advantage, we want to continue to point out that IMEA having our members at the table to work together to figure out which decisions make the most sense at the time that it's time to make that decision still makes the best long-term sense. Extending that contract now ensures that stability and that active role in the future generation for the next generation of your citizens. We continue to provide experts to optimize and evaluate and then retire those resources to meet your resource needs. So with that, Stacy's going to cover some of the things with regard we've been through, as well as our transition and our sustainability plan. Again, Troy's going to talk a little bit about our power contract. But to be clear, IMEA is already ahead of most all of the other utilities when it comes to transitioning to renewable energy. Stacy will talk about those things. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy Wilson. We'll answer any of your questions as we get through the end of this. Thank you.
I'm a little shorter than Kevin was. First of all, thank you so much for having us here this evening. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you, and we appreciate your consideration as we talk about the IMEA and what we're bringing to the future, and hope that you'll join us into the future. So you've heard about IMEA and the relationship of IMEA with St. Charles. And as you know, IMEA serves at the city's pleasure. We provide, IMEA, our staff provides expertise, resources, and options for the board to consider, but ultimately, the board, our cities, they're the ones that make the decision in which direction we're going to go. So what guides staff when we think about what our options are and what we're bringing to the board for their consideration? Who are we? What are we? Well, we really are what I liken to a three-legged stool. We have three values that govern everything we do every day at our office. And those three-legged stool, you can't have, if you picture yourself on a stool, one leg goes, the whole thing goes. You need all three legs to stand up. And so those three things are affordability, reliability, and sustainability. So just to talk a little bit about each one, as Kevin mentioned, we are a nonprofit. We were created for municipally owned electric utilities, by municipally owned electric utilities, and we only serve Illinois-owned municipal electric utilities. We don't serve anyone else. So we focus on saving you money instead of generating returns for shareholders. Everything we do is really driven to keep your rates lower and keep your power supply costs low so that your residents' costs are also low.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Followed by pound. Don't you love technology? Anyway, I'll just go ahead. I think we're, all right. So the thing is that all our costs are socialized within IMEA.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound.
Or when we earn
Otherwise, just press pound to continue.
Thank you.
You have joined the meeting as an attendee and will be muted throughout the meeting.
Oh, the beauty is, yeah. Are we good?
We're good.
Okay, so back to the point, which is that we're socialized. So everything we do is on a socialized basis, and all costs are shared, as Kevin had mentioned. So if we earn anything or save anything, all of that flows through to lower power supply costs to you, which then flows through to lower costs to your residents. So that's the affordable part of the stool. The second part is reliability and predictability. Well, job number one is to make sure that when your customers flip that switch, the lights come on. A lot of people don't really understand, but energy, when your lights come on, something is generating in that moment to make it happen. There is some storage, but right now you can only store 4 to 6 hours. It's not like, it's not like your water where you have a big water supply that you can store and use at a later date. Energy is in the moment when you need it, right? And so our job to keep that power flowing and make sure that power gets to your city gate is really critical and our number one priority. And we do that through our operations center. It's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operations center. So they notify you if they see issues locally that you have an issue, but then they also are the ones who are doing all the technical things that need to be done. They're scheduling the power in the day-ahead markets. They're scheduling the power in real-time markets. So every 5 minutes, they're making decisions that are based on how they know our cities. They know when certain factories close at certain times so that you don't need to schedule quite as much power. I mean, they really know the details, and they have very complex modeling to be able to schedule your power in the most economical way possible. The other thing is to support that is the fact that our cost of power has been under budget for 9 of the last 10 years. And actually, we just are about wrapping up an audit, so I will soon be able to say 10 of the last 11 years. But the one year that was the blip was the COVID year, and I think everybody knows that during COVID, a lot shut down, a lot less power usage. But even in that devastating time, we still kept it right at budget. So even in the tough times, we really kept your cost of power under control. And our understanding, our munis have always told us that you're looking for predictability, right? You base your budgets based on what your estimates are. And so they say it's more important to us that we don't want to be absolutely the highest cost, and we'd love to be the lowest cost, but we really want to make sure that we meet our budget and that we keep predictable. And that's what we shoot for in everything we do, is that predictability. And then the last place, of course, is sustainability. In making sure that we responsibly transition into the future to reach a net zero by 2050 and do it in a way that's affordable and reliable, and that making sure that your voice is heard. And that's where that representative government of your board member has from your city of St. Charles. All right, so here's the red line, blue line chart. I think you've seen this before, but really the blue portion is the power cost. That's the power supply cost. That's all that Kevin talked about. That is your resource, your capital cost, your A&G cost, your operations cost. That's your, we have some FERC attorneys. We do all of this work through the RTOs to make sure we're meeting all the regulatory requirements. I mean, everything that's your cost on your power supply, that blue bucket, right? The red part is transmission costs. And everybody in the entire state pays transmission costs. It's really a pass-through cost because transmission is what ComEd and Ameren own. ComEd and Ameren don't own generating resources anymore. They're really just, think of them as like an interstate highway, right? It's those large transmission lines that the power that was generated flows through to get to your city gates. We have to pay them to get that power to your gate. So that's what the transmission costs are. And we can't control those costs. We certainly monitor them and we challenge them when we think that they've overcharged us or maybe gold-plated something or whatnot.
This meeting is being recorded.
I'm not saying they do that, but I'm just saying that we're always keeping a watchful eye. But those are pass-through costs. So if you look back to 2014 with the line there of what your power costs were there, and we drew that black line across it, you can see that every year except for slightly on 2021 during COVID, we've been under, your power supply costs have been under budget. And we anticipate that going forward into our projected costs as well. As you can see, the red line is transmission costs. That's where prices have been mostly increasing. And we've kept, as I mentioned, your power prices flat for that time. In contrast, this really is just to show you that volatility that Kevin mentioned that we're seeing, particularly in Ameren and some in ComEd, where they've been more exposed to the market. And there's been some volatility there, and we anticipate that to continue into the future, and kind of goes against the concept of that predictable municipal budget plans. So we talked about your cost. What is your portfolio? What do we have? What's part of our portfolio? Well, we have a little bit of everything. First of all, we have solar. We have 6 solar systems, kind of smaller systems. They're 1 megawatt and half megawatt ones. One of them is right here in St. Charles that we built in 2017. And then we're putting in place 3 more of those. And then we're also seeking an Inflation Reduction Act program to add another 13 megawatts, 11 to 13 megawatts more. So a lot more of those smaller, but still utility-sized arrays in our communities. And then we also have, as part of our sustainability plan, we've entered into a 25 megawatt larger scale array down in deep southern Illinois that's going to be energized in June of 25. And then as Kevin mentioned, we've been seeking 100 megawatts of solar for quite some time. And this week we're going to actually talk to our board about receiving approval to enter into negotiations for between 100 and 150 megawatts of another large-scale solar to begin trying to get that in place as soon as possible. So that's solar. We also own wind. We were actually one of the first people in the state to enter into large-scale wind in 2009 with the Lee DeKalb Wind Energy Center. That's 70 megawatts of wind. And then we entered into another wind project in 2019 with Green River, and that's 50 megawatts. Probably have enough wind for right now. Wind tends to generate more at night, and you have to match what your energy needs are with what your resources are. So probably with the current portfolio, probably looking, that's why we're talking so much about solar, because more of the need that we have is during the day, because wind kind of covers that nighttime better for us, and we don't need more nighttime load. And then we have our baseload resource. We have coal. So we have 15% ownership of Prairie State Generating Company, which is in deep southern Illinois. And then we also have a 12% ownership of Trimble County, which is in Kentucky. And that's with LG&E that owns the other part of Trimble County. And then we have two hydropower facilities that total about 10 megawatts that we use the capacity for. And then we also have some short-term vendors that we do business with for hedges, mostly nuclear and solar. Those are for your really peak days in the summer or your really cold days in the winter, like those peaks of those really high times so that you're not exposed to the $3,000 megawatt day types that Kevin had mentioned earlier. And then we do round it out with purchases on the market as necessary. And lastly, we have 19 members that own their own generation capacity. Those are smaller, they're mostly diesel fired, and they're really there for if the grid is in time of stress, then the grid operators, MISO and RTO, they're the regulatory entities that kind of dictate the rules of the grid. They call on us and they say, the grid's in trouble, we need you to run. And so those towns run their generating capacity. But it's more used for backup if they have a local outage. That's mostly what it's used for, if at all. But it counts for capacity. So that's what we have. All right, so where are we going? Our board, a couple years ago, asked us to form a working group to develop a sustainability plan. I know you've been through this, so I'm going to hit the treetops, but I'm happy to answer any questions, as we go through this. The sustainability plan, the idea of the working group of our board members of our towns was to put forward a long-term goal, but in the plan, put forward the actions you can take over the next 3 to 5 years, actionable steps on the next 3 to 5 years to get there. And so we developed 5 principles for that plan. The first one is to provide an affordable, reliable, and sustainable power supply to our member communities. So we're going to do that through targeting reductions in greenhouse gases, increasing renewable generation resources, particularly as we have resources that are going to be retiring or expiring. And then thirdly, allow flexibility to embrace changes in technology. And the most thing that we're looking at the most soon is battery. The second principle is to design and facilitate energy conservation programs in support really of the concept that the most sustainable watt is the watt not generated. So you don't need to buy as many resources. You instead are looking to increase your energy efficiency in your towns. And as Kevin mentioned, we have a program already, so we're going to obviously keep that, but we're looking to expand it and grow that program into the future and offer more options there. The third principle is to offer flexible programs to mitigate peak loads, increase reliability, and better integrate our clean energy potential. So right now we have what's called a demand response program. This is really for large industrial and commercial customers. So if there's days that are very, very peak demand and the grid's stressed, we can call on those customers and pay them incentives to lower the amount of their usage. So we have that program now, and there's actually a customer in your community that utilizes that. Or actually they use the green power choices. But we have several large industrial customers that use that program. We're looking to try to offer something like that to our residents. We're seeking a grant right now through the feds to try to offer incentives and to increase communication with residents directly to say, hey, it's a grid stress day, can you adjust your thermostat a couple degrees, that type of thing, trying to make it so that we can really maximize the grid system to our advantage. The fourth one is to enable, accelerate, and integrate electric vehicles and their accommodating infrastructure. So in addition...
Can I stop for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Did you say that you need a second?
We don't have any sound right now through Zoom, so we think there may have been a glitch at the podium, so our admin staff is going to try to reset it real quick so we can just take a 2-minute break.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
I'll take a drink.
Vote on that.
Well, we don't know. They thought that maybe there was something. Disconnected the sound because everything was fine before. So we're going to stop it, shut it down, and start.
Okay.
All right. Bad weather's coming. Yeah, they just said there's a thunderstorm March till now. Wow. Actually, it's in the
We don't even know if that's what
When in doubt, when in doubt.
Where did you get that? John? Don't take me against you. It's like right there.
Oh, my first
These pens are kind of like, it's not too bad.
That's what I carry around.
I've never had a nice sound on this.
That's what I carry around. They're non-perishable. They're non-perishable. They don't need to be refrigerated. They'll last like forever. Right, but they have sugar. And they're only 70 calories. 1 gram of protein. Not getting you very far. Want some? Yeah. What grandpa are you that $10 is getting anywhere? Safety first.
It's the same line that we had for
Florida. Safety first.
Yeah, they were down 3-0. It's 3-3. Edmonton, but they're in Florida.
Just remember,
Yeah, I know. That's why I never liked the Oilers. You overshadowed Dennis Savard. He was my first favorite player. Dennis Savard?
Kings, right?
Kings. He's up there.
There's no
New Jersey Devils.
Oh, for sure.
Him and then Mario was you.
It's already a panelist, so there's no meeting to click on. Yeah, we're meeting audio and visual. One.
I'm good. I got it.
You've been invited to panelize. If we're not, we're just gonna go.
Wait, when are we going to vote?
No, we gotta go.
When are we going to vote on redoing this change?
It'll be available.
You know, it's so tight.
It was cool. I feel a little bit, yeah. Yeah, because my thing is so.
So I have to accept this.
Basically, we played last night. We played cheap, so it was 6, 8. Oh no, we
Someone's trying to get on.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So he plays every weekend.
Well, yeah.
The 13th. It's called Age.
I mean,
Pardon me? No, oh, that's fine. I'll get it for you.
yeah, I know.
Yeah, the both of them.
You guys good?
What meeting are you running here?
Where do we go?
Stacy, you can go ahead and get started.
Go ahead. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Wait, what did you just say?
All right, I just, I want to wrap up.
Hey guys, we're ready to get started.
I just want to wrap up on this page here by saying that with the EV program, part of that grant that we were seeking for energy efficiency to give incentives for that, it also includes an opportunity, if we receive the grant, to incentivize folks to charge their chargers for their cars at the proper time so that we can also preserve the grid in that manner. So really, you're using every tool you can possibly use to make a resource, if that makes sense. So you don't have to have that generation. And the fifth principle is to maintain and support a sustainable workforce, because of course we want to set the best example for ourselves. So in sum, this sustainability plan was created by our members through a working group, and they presented it, we presented it at an open board meeting of the IMEA. And then a couple months later, at our next board meeting, the board voted on this. So this is a board-approved plan, again, with a long-term goal with short-term actions. Well, when you have a plan, the responsible thing to do to your board is to let them know how it's going. So in the plan, we require an annual update to the board. Where are we at on the goals we've outlined in there? Where we are in the details, what's working, what's not working, and why. So an annual update to the board. And then every 3 years, there's a commitment to review the entire plan and update it. And as part of that, there will be a governing body stakeholder process. So there will be a stakeholder process to receive input from our towns as to what they want to see in the plan that can change in the future. And the concept is you put out basically a strategic plan that allows for checking and adjusting for future resource decisions as they're needed into the future. It's meant to be a living, breathing document that receives input from our communities going forward into the future. Okay, I'm somehow going the wrong direction. Let me just get us back. Apologize. Yep, got it. Okay, this is our snake diagram, for lack of a better term, that we fondly call it at the office. Really what this is, and I think you've seen this before, this is part of our plan, just really lays out that first row. You can see the projects that I've talked about in our portfolio now that we've already undertaken. And then you get into the second row, which is sort of right now where we're moving forward and transitioning. And so the first thing on the docket is beginning a battery storage study, which we're in the midst of starting to look towards to see what are the economics for battery storage and how can we integrate it into our portfolio, with a goal of, if it makes economic sense, to have some type of battery storage integrated by 2030 into the portfolio. And then the other piece there is add 130 megawatts of solar. I've mentioned we already got about 25 megawatts of that in place. And then we're seeking the additional 11 megawatts for through the federal infrastructure program. And then this week, as I mentioned, we're going to also be coming to our board and asking for approval to negotiate a new 150 megawatt solar project. So we're well on our way to getting what we're going to need there with regards to that, adding solar. But then the bottom line is really a lot of why we're here today. A lot of resources are going to be rolling off of our portfolio, and it's important to address those and to make good decisions on how to address those. So in 2030, that Lee to Calb wind contract expires, so it goes away, and we're going to have to replace those resources with something. Will it be wind? Will it be a combination of wind and solar? Maybe wind, solar, and battery, depending. Those are decisions that have to be made. That's in 2030. In 2035, we lose the Green River wind contract. That expires in 2035. Also in the 2035 to 2038 time range, half of Prairie State, CEDA requires that we have a 45% emission reduction of Prairie State in 2035. So there's a lot of planning that needs to take place. Boy, 2035, that sounds so far away, but it's not. 2030, that first decision, is 5 years away, a little over. So the 2035 timeframe, you're looking at right around 10 years by the time we know how many members are on board or not on board. And all of that impacts decisions as to how we replace that type of resource. And then you can see it continues out. 2045, the rest of Prairie State shuts down as a whole, and there will be no more Prairie State. And Trimble County 1 also shuts down in 2045 according to LG&E's plans, and then they also have 2050 closing of the entire Trimble County unit. And so that is why we're looking towards net zero 2050. So the biggest question we've been asked is, well, why now? Why are you here now? Well, resource planning, takes effort and time. And there's a few reasons, right? The first reason is really, as I talked about, those resources are rolling off. And in order to ensure we have an increased range of options to replace them, we have to work now towards that. It increases our range of options to know what we're looking for. Project lead times are pretty extensive right now, particularly for solar, which is a large piece of what we're going to be buying. You're looking at 4 to 6 years from the time of decision to energization. And that really is about finding the right resource in the right place that has met all the regulatory requirements. These requirements to interconnect with the grid that they have to pass through with the regional authorities, PJM, are taking years right now. And so in order to ensure, it's not like when you're talking about large utility scale solar, it's like you're landing a 747 versus, rooftop solar is a prop plane, right? You can do rooftop fairly quickly, but when you're talking large scale utility solar, you got to meet all the permitting requirements, you got to interconnect. Any resource takes time to plan and permit and put on. And we have supply chain backups, which are causing problems right now too. So that's part of it, lead time for projects. That's one part. The second part is how much are we going to buy? Right now we have 32 members. So we know our portfolio and what we need for the 32 members who are with us right now. Now, there's been 20 towns that have already decided to extend their contract with IMEA. If we only have to serve those 20, then that makes an impact on how many resources you buy or don't buy as those other generation flows off, right? So you're closing a couple of those things. Do you maybe not add more? Do you add less? What do you do, right? Those things matter. Obviously, knowing how much load you're going to serve is a key input into resource planning. And our members realize this. And they also realize that it's starting to have economic costs. We're really starting to be hamstrung on any resource decisions. And as we were trying to put this 100 megawatts of solar in, it became very evident that this was becoming a difficult hurdle to do, to plan, and to get effectively what you need for a resource. And that's why they asked us to put together the contract and to have an end date for towns to decide. So a year and a half, towns have to consider whether or not they want to join IMEA. But after that time, we'll know then, and we'll know how to plan, and we'll know how much load we need to serve. And that will impact our decisions then on what we buy. You don't want to underbuy, you don't want to overbuy, right? There's cost to all of those pieces. I've lost the, do you want, is it just a, it doesn't like me, I guess. I know, 2 strikes. All right. Well, while he's figuring out, is it all right if I just continue, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So to properly prepare and strategically transition to net zero and away from coal, we have to know how many people are with us, so we know how many resources to buy into the future, and what resource portfolio to put together. The third one is price. We've really found that when you're looking to put in renewable resources, 20-year contracts are the best deal. You can do a 10-year contract, but it's going to cost you a lot more. 20 years is really the right place. For financing purposes, it's what the vendors want. It's what puts everything together at a good price that makes sense. And again, as I talked about, we're trying to put together that 100 megawatts of solar now. We really came to fruition to see what the economic impact was. We only have 11 years left on our contract. We can't buy power after 2035. So we couldn't enter into 20-year deals with only 11 years left. We didn't have that runway, if that makes sense. We got 11 years to 2035. We couldn't pursue anything beyond that date. Really hamstrung us on costs. And here's some notional dollars so you can see what that means. If we were to enter into, again, notional dollars, a 20-year PPA, power purchase agreement, for a utility scale solar of 100 megawatts, that's about 65 megawatt hours. Probably putting it more in what you're used to, which is a kilowatt hour, that's 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour, just to give you a perspective, okay? If you did a 10-year one, which is what we were limited to with no membership beyond 2035, that is $95 a megawatt hour. So that's 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour, more like what you're used to seeing on your bill, right? So what's that add up to? That's a $64 million cost over 10 years, about $6.5 million a year of cost. And so those dollars really add up. That's for one 100 megawatt solar array. We're going to need to enter into more solar array PPAs into the future if we keep all 32 members, particularly as we begin to replace those wind contracts and begin to replace Prairie State. So those dollars really accumulate to a much larger figure into the future. And so that is really the things we're looking at. So why now? Well, the reason goes right back to that three-legged stool that I started out with. I just talked to you about the affordability and the economic reason that we want to do this now, so that we have that 20 years and we can enter into what makes more cost economic decisions. So that's affordability. As far as reliability, predictability, that is the fact that you need to know how much to buy. You don't want to overbuy, you don't want to underbuy, because if you do, if you have to wait till that last second decision with just a year or two, you're sort of forced into what I call risk-based premium, or volatility of the market. It may not be the right time and you're sort of stuck trying to find a resource scrambling around. Whereas now you can look and plan methodically and smartly and economically and reliably put that portfolio together. And then the third prong, if you remember, of the table or the bench or the chair or whatever I said, is sustainability. And again, we're doing this because we are transitioning to net zero. We have a lot of resources to replace, the coal-fired unit in particular there, that 2035-38 timeframe, and we're going to need to be able to know who our members are to work forward into the future. So I've talked a long time, and with that, I'm going to give you a new person. I'm going to pass this on to Troy so he can give you the key components of the contract. Thank you for your time.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think you can. Thank you. All right. So normally I come up here and I tell you how long I've been here, but Kevin already did that, but I'm going to do it anyway. I started working for IMEA, their outside general counsel. I was straight out of law school. I had taken the bar exam, hadn't quite gotten my results yet. I went to work for him in March of 1991. Not St. Charles, but the original 24 IMEA members that signed the first power sales contracts when we bought into that first asset, Trimble County 1. They signed those in 1990. They started taking power under those contracts March 1st, 1991. So I literally got there within a week or two after we started serving under these contracts. Why do I tell you that? I tell you that because that's the same basic contract that we've brought before you now. I didn't write it, but I've been administering it for 33 years. I've been dealing with the changes in the industry for 33 years, and what we've done with the contract that's in front of you is update that contract, but basically keep the same design, okay? So, let me back up just a little bit. I've jumped a slide, and I forget to do the slides anyway. Was I supposed to do this? I went backwards, sorry. All right, I'm there. So, how did we arrive at these decisions? I mean, we did consider going and getting a brand new, power sales contract, that you could all the best bells and whistles and the best provisions that people have been writing for the last 30 years, make it all new and shiny. But we had a working group of our members. Working group of 6 members plus the CEO, Mr. Gaydon, and myself, because like I said, I've been doing this for 33 years. I've lived through everything that's happened to IMEA since they started serving the members out of the first coal plant that we bought into. So we put together that working group, those 6 people. It included Mr. Sorg, your representative on IMEA's board. He was very active, very helpful. One of the things we discussed is what form of contract to use, and everybody said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Use the same contract form that we've got now. Take that contract, update it, because there's lots of changes in the industry in the last 33 years, and go forward. So that's what we did. We had lots of meetings with that working group throughout the spring and summer of 2023. We got to a point where we had a final document, had one last meeting with the working group. They told us to go ahead and present it to the IMEA board in December, which we did, December of 23. At that time, we asked everybody, review it, send it to your city attorneys, send us questions, send us comments, send us suggested edits. And your city attorney, Mr. Peppers, did do that, and we made some changes because he looked at some sections that I didn't think to update. And so we've now updated them thanks to his input. We had a webinar in January of 2024 where we invited all the city attorneys and any city administrators like your city manager that wanted to come. I have my list here. I know Mr. Peppers was on that webinar and listened. I know Pete was on that and listened. I think there were about 50 people total that did that. So what I'm giving you today on the contract is just the tippy tops of the trees. There is a much deeper slideshow presentation, and Nick, I think we did send those out to you afterwards, so you may have that. If you don't have it, I can hit send. Okay. So again, if you want the specifics, your city attorney has those. So I'm wasting a lot of time on this one slide, but we got suggestions from the members. We submitted it back to the members in February of 2024, and they approved the final form of the contract. We started rolling those contracts out to the members on March 1st, and I think you heard either Kevin or Stacy or both tell you that 20 of the other members have already signed up, have already approved from their perspective. The IMEA board has 10 more to approve next week, and we'll be at 20. So I'm going to move on. Wrong way. All right, as I said, the contract form, it's the same. It's been updated for the industry changes, and for the most part, I'm not sure they touched on it, so I'm gonna take a little bit of your time, if you don't mind, and talk about some of the updates. Regional transmission organizations, you heard Kevin and Stacy both mention PJM. In downstate Illinois, it's MISO. The state's split into 2 different RTOs. The RTOs they don't just control the wires. They control the markets. They have people who decide based on cost curves that you enter into their portal every 5 minutes of every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, whether or not to dispatch generators, and they dispatch it based on cost. IMEA has an operations center that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that puts our offer curves in, and they dispatch our units. Those types of changes and what you have to do for your generators to qualify, those are some of the types of updates that are in this contract from where it was originally in 1990 when it was signed. The next topic here on this slide, rates and charges. The rates and charges, same as the existing contract with one exception that I'll point out here in just a second. It's a postage stamp rate. Everybody pays the same rate. There are some minor exceptions, and for example, you won't know where the city of Highland is, but the city of Highland wanted us to build a transmission line for them back in 1990 when they signed up. Well, obviously it doesn't make sense for the other 31 members to pay for a transmission line that only serves Highland, so there's an exception that allowed us to charge Highland for their transmission line. That exception was already there. The new exception that's there now, and I think I heard some people talking about it when I listened to your last meeting. It's a cost causer provision. The reason the cost causer provision is there is because you've heard probably that there's these data farm issues with artificial intelligence now that's going to be gobbling up lots and lots and lots of energy. If one of those farms wants to go to, let's pick on a town that isn't even a member of IMEA. Kevin mentioned Elgin. Elgin's not a municipal, they're not a member of IMEA, but if they were, and Elgin wanted to bring in one of those data farms, and they wanted the jobs and they wanted the economic growth, and they said, hey, we'll let you come in without a deposit. We'll let you come in and we'll give you some incentives to come in because we really want you to locate here. We would have to go out and secure power supply to serve that load, and we would have to lock in contracts for at least the period of time that that load was expected to be served. And if that load didn't show up, then all of the members would be subject to paying for that. That's why we wrote this cost causer provision. The cost causer provision basically says, and I can get into the words, Nick's looked at the words. If Nick has some questions, I'm sure he can call me and we can talk about the words. But basically, if it's a unique situation that benefits you or a small group of yous, not the membership as a whole, then the board could decide that it's a cost causer situation. Again, like that data farm situation that I suggested. You don't want to pay for somebody else's bad decisions not showing up, and nobody else wants to pay for yours if you made one. So again, we think the cost causer provision's reasonable. We tried to write it reasonable. We sent it out to people to look at. We gave everybody a chance to shoot at it. We made the changes that people asked for. So I think that's probably about enough for that slide. Contract length, 20 years. Stacy just gave you a big long thing about why we need to do this contract extension now. I literally have been working with our engineering and market staff to try and negotiate these deals, trying to find deals and negotiating deals. And until recently, you couldn't find one that was shorter than 20 years. And we've got several where they want 25 years. We had one the other day that talked about 15, and we said, well, give us the price for 15. Maybe we'll think about that. And the next call, nope, we want to do 20. So you can't do a deal. If you're going to do rooftop solar, they want 20 years. They want you to give them they want you to give them the credits for 20 years. Same things with a big utility grade solar. It takes 20 years. We've got 11 years left on our existing contract, 20 years on the next contract starting in 2035. Makes sense. It gives us a chance to do planning now for the urgent needs now. It gives us a chance in the middle of the contract to plan through the end of that contract. And probably about 2045, I don't think I'll still be here then, I've been here quite a while already, but in about 2045, we'll be coming back to all of the members of IMEA and saying, hey, it's time to start talking about signing up for the next contract because we got to start planning the resources for how we're going to serve you going forward in the future. So again, the 20 years we think is a good thing. There's one other new provision in the contract that I wanted to point out to you. That's the member-directed resource. That's the one that would allow you or a group of yous to join together to get up to 10% of your peak demand through a project that you would either own or contract for yourself. How are we going to make that work? Well, we still want to provide your full requirements. The only way for us to plan for your needs and to go get the resources that we need to serve you is if it's a full requirements contract. But we can allow up to 10% of you going out and getting your own resource. You would then assign that resource to us. You guys don't have behind the meter or generation like Winnetka does, but we have a separate contract with the members that have that behind the meter generation like Winnetka. They dedicate the generators to us. They have their personnel that run them, and we follow the RTO cues on when to run them. Sometimes we run them for other than when the market calls us. Sometimes our operations center makes an economic decision that it's a good idea to run right now because we could avoid a peak and therefore save some money. So that dedication of what we call the capacity purchase agreement. Again, you guys don't have one, but Winnetka does, Rock Falls does, as Stacy said, 19 total members do. That's the design for this member-directed renewable thing. You would go buy the contract, or if you're going to put a generator in your town, or if you were going to have ownership in a generator that's not in your town, you would pay all the costs of your contract or your ownership. You would dedicate that to us, and then we, in turn, we would put it into the PJM market or the MISO market if you did something down south. We would pay you the same capacity credit that PJM pays us. We would pay you the same locational marginal prices that PJM pays us. And if your costs are less than that, then that's a benefit to you. If your costs are more than that, then that's the premium that you pay for wanting to do the member-directed renewable thing faster. So again, we think we've designed it in a reasonable manner. We wanted to provide this opportunity for locally driven renewables. And again, that and the cost causer are the two big changes to the contract. Everything else is really basically updating it based on our life experience over the last 33 years. The things that we said, darn, I wish the contract was written better here, so we'd fix it. Darn, the RTOs are making us do something different with how we accredit our generators. I wish we had done something different there. So those are the types of changes we made. So I have one last slide, and then I'll open it up for questions with Mr. Gaydon and any of us that you want. Why IMEA? Powering with purpose. We supply low-cost, reliable, and sustainable power. We offer value-added services tailor-made for your municipal electric system. You have a direct voice in the decisions that we make. We share your long-term obligation to serve. We are not for profit, focused on you, not Wall Street. And the final line is, let's extend into the future the good results that we've achieved together. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm sure there's a lot of, I know we have a ton of questions and everyone wants to go. So my only ask is that we don't spend 45 minutes with each council member, so giving people the opportunity to kind of pass the mic a little bit. I'm not going to tell you, how many bullet points you can say, but just use your best judgment to be mindful of other people and go. So with that, David, go ahead.
Thank you.
That's too long. Go ahead.
Well, no, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you can just ask all of those comments to be directed towards Director Sewer so he can corral those and give those to IMEA while the council members are asking questions as well.
Yes, thank you. So everyone knows Peter, if you could get the questions that we compiled. Thank you. Sorry. David.
No, no worries. No, thank you. And I appreciate all of your time and all the energy, pun intended, that you put into this presentation. So, real quick, and I won't take up too much time. So I appreciate your explanation. I understand it. I get it. You do have your sustainability plan. You mentioned options several times, which is great. So with all of that being said, and diverse supplies and wanting to become more diverse moving forward, thoughts or your position then on why hasn't there been any discussion, or are you planning perhaps of completing a resource plan, an integrated resource plan that looks into other options moving forward? Is that something that you have considered in terms of just, you have solar, you have wind, what have you, but I think there are these opportunities to study those more, and I just haven't heard of that occurring. Are you planning to do that?
Yeah, well, first off, we do have resource planning, and so we have somebody whose job title is resource planner, and we go through that process on a regular basis. Our board is very well aware of what our long-term resource plans are. It's just not something that we've published.
Right.
And part of that is because as things continue to evolve, if it says you have to do a solar project in 2027, sometimes it may limit your ability to have some flexibility. So for an example, we've been working with a vendor, we've been looking at a number of vendors trying to acquire a 100 megawatt solar project, but because of the transmission planning queues that we've talked about before, and the interest rates and waiting for supply chains things to happen, what's happened is that opportunity that we thought was 100 megawatts came back as 150 megawatts. And so if that integrated resource plan said that you're going to get 100 megawatts because that's where it fits perfectly on this time frame, it limits your options moving forward. So from a resource planning standpoint, and again, that's one of the things that I talked about, is from a long-term resource stability and cost standpoint, we're in better shape than anybody in this state when it comes to the resources we have today are fairly new, very reliable, very cost effective. And as Stacy alluded to, as those resources come offline, part of that integrated resource plan that you talk about is, if we knew that St. Charles is going to be in for 130 megawatts plus, if we knew that Naperville was going to be in for 300 megawatts plus, if we knew that the others that are still there, then that will require us to continue to expand that resource planning to continue to make those decisions that make the most sense. That's that bottom line that Stacy had on that snake diagram. So there's a number of things that we have had those resource planning decisions, and the ones that make the most sense. And we're going to talk about some of those things in our board meeting on Wednesday and Thursday.
A couple more. I appreciate that. Okay, and then regarding, I know we're discussing the power contract, purchase contract, but in terms of ownership, I'm just hypothetical. I want to understand the relationship between our decision with this purchase contract and our membership or ownership and with Prairie State and the other assets that we have. So it says in the contract here that in the definitions it mentions, oops, sorry, I lost it here. Participating members shall be members, and those members that are hereafter become parties to power sales contracts. And then it also says a member shall be the city, villages, or towns executing this contract. So if we you want us to make a decision by May of next year. If we decline, is our membership at risk eventually after 2035 if we decide not to do anything, because we're not executing the contract?
Yeah. So what the board has done is they basically said that this open season that we have until the end of April next year is designed to anticipate what are all those, how many steaks do I got to buy for the cookout, right? And then, so therefore, how much do we need to plan for the long term? We talked about our wind project, our first wind project comes up in 2030. That one, we're going to have to make that decision fairly quickly. And so when it comes to, if you all don't decide to make a decision by that time frame, your contract then ends with us on September 30th, 2035.
Right.
If the city then decides at some point in time, at a later time, that you'd like to have IMEA consider doing that, and there's precedence for this in the past, that if the resource decisions that had already been made for those that had decided to come and be in for the long duration, And then at the last minute, for example, if it's 2032, for example, and says, hey, we want to be ready to go for 2035, again, when something takes 8 or 9 years to develop a project, and there's this period of time in the interim where the rest of the members have to go out and procure other resources that are not as cost effective as what they had, then there's been precedents in the past where there's a premium that's been paid by those that come in late. As an example, if let's just say that that premium is this much, well then that premium likely would be charged through some period of time that would keep the other members that made that long-term decision whole, would be equitable. That's something that the community can make that decision on, whether they think that's fair and equitable. If IMEA then could go out and buy something cheaper or the same cost than what our other resources are, then the IMEA board, then the staff would say to the IMEA board, well, it's in line with the rest of the cost of everything else, then we should allow that to happen on a non-premium basis. But at the same time, what we've seen in the past and is likely to happen over the next 10 years is as a bunch of the, not just coal, but gas and other resources come offline, the capacity markets gets much more volatile, the energy prices gets much more volatile, and those risks are much higher. Then at that point in time, the IMEA board may say the premium would be so high, the city may not want to pay that premium to take that risk, and therefore then the city would look at the other options that are available out there. So to say today in middle of 2024 that I know exactly what's going to happen in 2030 and 2032 and 2035 and 2042, I or anybody else can't make that assessment. But that's really, there's been precedents for that before. We have 3 of our members right now that are paying a premium for coming in late because the rest during one of those volatile periods when they said, we'd like to become a member now, when they came in that volatile period, the rest of the members said, well, we're going to have to go out and procure more energy, more capacity at a higher price that's embedded into our system. We're going to offer this, but there's a premium to be paid. And in some cases, that premium was over a 14-year period.
So, thank you. And so what's the latest, this is my last question, we'll go around, it's fine. So we have until okay, so next May, again, that's the ideal time you'd like a decision made. What is the latest, I guess, to your point, not to 2035, I'm not suggesting that, waiting to the bitter end. What are we talking, like 2 or 3 years? Is that still within, or is that not something that, I'm just curious. Like,
that's ultimately the IMEA board's decision. I guess what I would say is, if things look very similar from, as we go along and nothing really changes, then again, that's something that then the board would look at that and the staff would do the analysis and say, well, it looks like we can get things, we can go buy some more product that doesn't have a material cost up or a material cost down, then they can make that decision at that point in time. The risk is, and the history and the precedence that's been seen is, no, we're going to look at other options. When the other options are still being evaluated, something happens in the marketplace. Natural gas goes to $9, capacity market goes to $237 instead of $200 or $150, and then it's like, we got to do something. And at that point, the market tenses up and things get really expensive, and then people say that, we got to hedge our bets. Well, that's the wrong time to be hedging the bets for the long period of time. So again, I can't definitively tell you. That will ultimately be the IMEA board's decision. And again, as we've talked about, 20 of those members have already made that long-term commitment today, subject to them to the rest of the board approving them on Thursday, which I'm fairly comfortable they will do. That will be their decision to make with what's in the collective best interest of all of those that are members of the IMEA. Because again, it's for lack of a better term, it's a nonprofit cooperative of municipal utilities.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the information. Very thorough. Echoing off of my colleague over there, Alderman Petrella, I'm trying to understand, you're asking us to make a 30-year commitment And the residents will be bound by this for 30 years. That's one heck of a long contract for anybody, for this one body to make for 30 years. We will be bound by the contract.
Well,
I
actually,
have an issue. I'm having trouble that we have to make the decision now too. I mean, it's only been, we've had like a year to discuss this. A year to decide on a 30-year contract. That's a big commitment for the residents to have to accept from this body up here. That concerns me.
I understand your concerns. I guess what I would clarify is it's a 20-year commitment, because you already have a commitment till 2035 with the
Right, it would
agency.
be 20, right.
But it would be an additional 20 years on top of that.
But totally, we're making, what we decide now will be a total of 30 years.
30 years from where you're at today.
Right.
Understand what you're saying.
20 years,
Don't
you're right.
don't
And
deny
to
what
your
you said
point,
there.
It's 20 years extension from 35 to 2055.
I would say that part of making sure that the IMA membership can have the best options that are out there for the longest period of time, having that longer, Stacy used the term longer runway, to be able to take a look at which resources make the most sense for what period of time, gives that capability that we don't have today. I would also say that this governing body makes long-term decisions on a lot of things on a regular basis. For example, if your water treatment plant isn't meeting codes, then you have to make a long-term water, and forgive me if I've stepped into the wrong thing here with regard to whether it's water treatment systems, sewer treatment systems, storm sewer systems. Those decisions are long-term decisions for the long-term benefit of the community. And think of it this way: this is a long-term decision to make the best choice, the same choice that 31 other cities are making together with you to make that decision together, instead of you being by yourself.
You make a valid argument, except with the water treatment plant, this is something that we have to have by the EPA. We are going to be using ourselves. This isn't outside. We are outsourcing our electricity to IMEA. I mean, the comparison, I'm a little iffy on that. I just think that it's something that needs to be, I don't think we have enough time to make this decision, because there are other options out there. I mean, and another point is, we're still using, how much coal, what percent of our electricity is generated by coal?
Depending on the year, it's somewhere between 75 and 80% of
80%.
the energy that's produced
Right.
for our power supply comes from coal. But as over time, as we've alluded to, those things will be reduced, and we will be replacing that with renewable resources as required.
Okay. And what time, okay, going by your flow chart, you anticipate, what was it, 2045, right? Is when the plant, when you shut down the first
Parish State, half of Parish State will shut down in the middle of 2038.
Right.
It'll reduce 45% of its emissions, and in 2040, at the end of 2045, Parish State, again, subject to the state's reliability, will be shut down. Again, there's provisions in the CEJA law that says if the regional transmission organizations, RTOs, PJM and MISO, deem that those resources need to stay there to ensure reliability, it can extend longer than that. But again, that's water that hasn't even thought about.
You're right, but the point is, the whole point of a lot of these residents' concern is coal. Okay, we're going to be sticking with 50% probably of our electricity is going to be generated by coal for the next 20 odd years. Somewhere in that area. That's another concern of mine.
I understand that.
And I'd like to look at other options. I mean, I'm not saying we're not going to stay with you, but for the time period we have, 1 year is not much time to figure out
the resources that we provide are primarily based, again, as we alluded to, coal, solar, wind, and some hydro, and then additional contract things, and our members to be able to provide those things. We'll be transitioning out of those things, but candidly, the other states and the other alternatives that are surround us, actually, they generate more in the upper Midwest in this region. The other states around us, on a percentage basis through the whole state, generate more of their power with coal-fired power than does the state of Illinois. So again, if you would consider about looking at other options, like for example, buying straight out of the PJM market, today about 30% of the energy that's being produced right now is being produced by coal-fired power. Another 30 to 35% or 40% is being produced by natural gas generation, which also has CO2 in it as well. And so any given day, we might see that in the PJM marketplace, about 90% of that, 85% of that is produced by thermal-based resources. In MISO, it's even a higher number than that, because again, in this region, that has been the traditional fuel that's been used, hence the Illinois Basin coal seam, which is where the coal has come from. So it's something that the state is transitioning off, the country is transitioning off, but it's probably going to take a longer period of time than many people would like for that to happen. But again, in order to ensure the reliability, because again, if it's as we talked about the storm event from the Christmas of 2022, the wind blew like crazy, right? It was 50-mile-an-hour winds.
Oh yeah, I remember.
But again, in the middle of wintertime, there's very little, if any, solar, because number one, there's likely snow on top of it. But at the same time, the wind did blow, but there's a certain point in time where the wind gets so high that the wind turbines end up shutting themselves off to protect themselves from
exceeding their RPM, right?
Yeah, and so we, at this point in time, in order to ensure the reliability on that really cold winter day, you know, the Storm Uri day we had in President's Day of 2021, or the really hot day, you know, 105 degrees everywhere through this region, in order to ensure the reliability of the system, all of the generators are going to be using some basis of thermal generation. The percentages are going to be different depending on which utility is, but when you look at it all together, those thermal resources, no matter who you buy from, you're likely going to be buying some of those thermal resources from somebody.
I have more questions, but I will defer to the rest of the group. Thank you.
How you doing? Thank you very much. That was very informative. I just had a quick question regarding the alternative renewable resources. I believe Peter Soar stated that it's 11%, that it's leading the rest of these power supply type organizations in the state of Illinois. I'm not curious at this point what those resources are, but I guess I'm asking how or why IMEA is leading the way, and is it part of stewardship? Is it because you're being coerced into the state model that they have where we need to be? And what do you expect that percentage to be in 2035?
Well, first of all, again, it goes back to what will our percentage be in 2035 depends on how many people extend those contracts in 2035.
Sure. No, I get that. But seeing where it's at now, 11%, I guess, how did you get to where you're at now for 11%? And I'm just I don't need an exact number, I'm just kind of curious where we're going to be when that contract, if it's signed, would take place.
Yeah, right now, when I first came in 2011, we had already signed up for that 70 megawatts of wind project. We were 6.5% renewables at that moment in time. And so as there was an opportunity to take a look at a wind project in the PJM area, which is west of here, if you're familiar, halfway between Princeton and Rock Falls, Illinois, around Walnut, Illinois, if you've been in that neighborhood, there was an opportunity to get involved in that wind project that for our resource needs, it fit and made sense, because as we were working to exit from a long-term coal-based, cost-based baseload resource contract that we had originally with Ameren, and ultimately was with Vistra. Troy and I and a number of others on our team worked our tails off to get out of that contract. It was supposed to end in 2035. And we shortened that contract down. It was supposed to end in 2026. And then we went back to contract negotiations, and we were able to end that in 2022, knowing that we were going to be able to need some additional resources to replace that coal-fired energy. To do that, we had an opportunity to get into a wind project. We've also been working on solar projects, which have been harder to get here lately. So we're able to acquire that one. The Green River 50 megawatt project took us to about 11%. That's where we are right now. We've continued to add a few megawatts here and there with what we call this behind the meter solar. That still keeps us in the 11, 12% range. As we continue to work our way through these additional, not only the 150 megawatt project that I'm talking about that we're going to seek our board's approval to finalize those negotiations, and Stacy alluded to some solar projects inside of some of our members using some of that federal stimulus money to be able to work with a vendor to get that done. We'll be in the neighborhood of about 20% renewable energy right now. And again, that's all with that blue line, red line that's been flat during that entire period of time, plus all the services that we've added during that same period of time. We've kept our members' rates flat. During that same point in time, for those of you that get bills from ComEd, there's a number of line items on there, and that renewable energy charge that's on there, the state has collected hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to incentivize that renewable energy business to do that. And in all that time that they've been working on that since FIJA in 2017, they're at about 6.8%. The report just came out about a month ago. They're at 6.8%. They're going to continue to expand, but the state's Illinois Power Agency, to be confused with IMEA, they're having the same struggles of delays of implementation as everybody is because of the supply chain, because of the transmission queue, because of the cost of money has gone higher. Their cost has gone up significantly higher than they projected as well. So sometimes they've run out of money during that year to be able to do that. So I guess that's a long answer to, by 2035, we'll likely be well north of 20%, perhaps 30%. But again, that gets back to being able to find the right resource at the right time to be able to serve our members that keeps those rates stable, and at the same time make sure we have reliable resources. Because again, if for example, if we decided we're only going to go with solar and that's all we're going to have, doubling, quadrupling 10 times the amount of solar on a cloudy day still gets you 0 megawatts. Right. And so there you're still subject to the marketplace that somebody that has resources that are not solar in this area, whether it's wind, battery, whatever the case might be, that are available, it's very likely that that power would come from an outside utility that's using natural gas or coal to be able to generate that power.
So I guess, and I'm just asking this just a short answer, what differentiates IMEA from all these other groups that are not at that 11% threshold that you are right now? How come you're there, and are they supposed to catch up? Are they just kind of, are you the steward that's leading them there?
I guess I would say that it's people that are experienced and passionate about what we do, and we see an opportunity that's in front of us, and we have we meet with our board 8 times a year.
Sure.
We talk with our board about this is something that we think is a strategic opportunity. For example, Pete remembers we had a 100 goal here a couple of years ago. One of those hundreds was 100 megawatts of solar. It's been really frustrating to have to talk to so many potential candidates to get this done. In fact, one of the things we've just recently come up to move us from 100 to 150 is because what didn't look like a lot of competition from other prospective buyers, all of a sudden a data center said, hey, we'd be interested in taking the whole thing. And so we said, hey, if we have to take the whole thing, it is the right mix, it is the right point, and it's a proven vendor that we've already worked with in the past, and we have comfort with, and they're a proven developer. That's one of the things that we've seen in the primarily the solar business is having, they're typically been done by limited liability companies instead of traditional utilities or corporations. And so the liquidity and the ability to stand behind the promises that they make, if you're dealing with a limited liability company, sometimes it's challenging to get them to post that capital when they need it. And again, because if they walk away and you've made these expectations and they walk away, well, now you've just lost some opportunity cost that you got to go replace that. So again, I've been doing this for 37 years, and this business is 1,000 times different than it used to be. And in the next 37 years, it's going to be 1,000 times different then too.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
You bet.
I have a couple of questions related to the timeline. And I think I'll start with this one, that how long was it when IMEA began researching the need to come to the members for this early renewal? I guess my question is, you had an enormous amount of lead-up time to gather all of the information that you needed to present us with all of this information. And to Alderperson Slakaitis' point, we're being given a very short period of time to then look at the data that we have. So I'm trying to understand how you're asking your members to take very complicated information with very little alternative, and take this information and make these decisions for this 20-year time period.
Well, Jamie, I would say that definitively I would go back into early 2022, that as we were looking to acquire this 100 megawatts of solar, as we were talking to these developers about, again, to make a financial commitment for a new resource that went beyond 2035, if we didn't know who was going to be there to pay the bills, you can imagine the counterparty said, well, who's going to be there? Who's going to take this power and guarantee those revenue streams for us? And so as we started to look at that, it got harder and harder to convince folks that again, Stacy's notional thing of having the $95 per megawatt hour of if you did a 10-year deal, we started to look more deeply at that and saying that, for example, I've said, I'm pretty comfortable saying to you is, I'm pretty comfortable that since you've been in the business since 1892, that the city of St. Charles will likely be in the power supply business in 2036, and that you're going to want and need power supply to serve your customers like you have for 140 years, 130 years in that time frame as well. And so this is something that, as this has evolved through 2022, we had a November 2022 strategic planning session, again, closed session, to look at strategy, to look at resources, look at the various options that were in front of us. And the other thing that happens here is what some folks may or may not know, when you're negotiating with renewable developers, wind, solar, batteries, whatever the case might be, every one of them has you sign a non-disclosure agreement. You can't publicly state price, terms, the location, etc., unless and until unless it's approved by them to be able to do that. And that's really kind of a competitive thing for them. If their number's on the street, then the next guy or gal could say, well, I'll do it for $1 cheaper, or whatever the case is. So we have to honor those non-disclosure agreements, and we signed a lot of those, including this vendor that we have that we've been working with. So that's how in November 2022 we said, we're going to set this goal, we're going to create this sustainability plan that we worked on for the following year to be able to do those things. The board, knowing that we were going to be working our way towards renewing contracts much earlier than that was. So we've been working on this for 2.5 years to be able to get this done. And so I understand that a 16-month time frame may seem like a short period of time to get that done, but I guess what I would say is I think part of our performance over the last 40 years and the last 20 years, with you all being a total requirement supply customer of ours, has proven that we are deeply engaged in this business and passionate about what we do. We have people that are very knowledgeable about this. Again, you go around my offices, and we just had our Vice President of Operations retire after 29 years with us, and the person that was our Manager of Operations, she has been with us for 24 years. And the guy that took over for our Manager of Electric Operations has been with us for 15 years. And so we have folks that it's a small group of people that work very hard and work very closely together to do what we can for our members in a very volatile, challenging technical business. And so it's at least 2.5 years we've been working on this. And so understand, from your perspective, it might seem like it's a short time frame, but at the same time, this is something that's we've been working on for a considerable period of time.
That definitely helps. So I think to follow up on that, my question is, will we as a council receive an independent IRP that will help us evaluate whether this is something that's cost effective for us as well as meeting the environmental obligations for our residents?
Well, number one, we will, and we always will meet the environmental obligations under the state and federal law.
Right.
That's a given.
But my question is, are we going to receive an independent IRP that will allow us to demonstrate that? Because we understand that you can provide us with information, but asking for something that is independently generated is what I'm asking about.
So will IMEA
have an
independent
IRP,
separate resource planner to provide you with a resource plan for what we might offer you, or what we will offer after you've? I'm not clear. Is it subject to the offer that we would provide you with an independently done integrated resource plan?
Correct.
That's something that the board would have to decide on, but you can imagine that 20 of them have already decided that the resource plans that they've looked at, they're comfortable with to move forward as a partnership. And so I would, Pete, you can speak to this, but I would think that the IMA board would not likely be willing to fund a specific separate St. Charles integrated resource plan to evaluate your cost separate from everybody else's.
Or an overall
Is that
IRP, not necessarily specific to St. Charles.
Again, that IRP gets back to this issue of, unless I know which resource or how many resources we're going to need to procure, it's the chicken and the egg thing.
Yeah.
See what I mean? So, to some large degree, if IMA doesn't acquire any additional resources or any additional members beyond what we have right now, our resource needs are pretty small in the long term. That's why this difference of to be able to do that. If again, that's something that Pete can come back. We can talk to the board about that. That's something that we've heard from folks. Whether or not the board wants us to have an IRP done, that's something that we'd be more than willing to take a look at.
Okay.
But what I'm comfortable with is that the resource planning that we have and we've done, it's got many of those things in it already. It may not be in a form that our sustainability plan looks like, but at the same time, it's something that we could do. But again, I think Ron had alluded to that earlier, is that the largest concern that a number of folks have is that we still have coal in our portfolio.
Yeah,
and unless and until the coal comes out of the portfolio, there's some folks that won't be supportive of having that resource mix. And again, what I continue to say is, any other supplier that you get power from, none of them can provide 100% of the time renewable energy to St. Charles or any other city in this country.
Right.
So it's something that no matter who you were buying the power supply from, it would have some form of thermal generation in it to be able to ensure that reliability.
I think something else that our residents are trying to understand is what place carbon capture has in the future plans, the potential for that, as well as the coal mine that is owned with Prairie State.
Yeah, so 2 questions. I'll take the carbon sequestration one first. Carbon sequestration is something that we are at the owners of Prairie State have evaluated. We did a study, federally subsidized study in 2022 that looked at, and again, this is all public information, that looked at one of the generators to control 90% of that would cost about $2 billion and about $180 million a year to operate. So therefore, it would be nearly double that cost to carbon sequester the entire project. That's not something that at this point it looks like the IMEA or the rest of the partners are interested in doing from a cost-benefit standpoint. However, it's kind of a push-pull situation here because, number one, that's not anything that we as IMEA or the other 8 owners of Prairie State have an appetite to do on our own. That's something that if there was a carbon sequestration system there, we wouldn't be the owner, operator, developer. We would contract with somebody to do that. They would be responsible for sequestering the carbon, for the financing, to take care of all those things, and the liabilities that would go along with that. So that's not something that's something that IMEA has been pretty upfront about of, we are not going to own a carbon sequestration machine at Prairie State, okay? And so if that were to happen, that would have to be an independent, separate developer, and that would ensure financial stability, indemnification, proven performance, a business plan that makes sense to be able to adhere to those things. So again, at this point, to me, it seems like a long shot. However, if you look at what the federal government has recently done, they've said in order for not only coal but natural gas plants to continue to operate beyond 2040, it has to use carbon sequestration to be able to do that. So coal is not the only one that are going to be looking at this. We're dealing with petroleum facilities and ethanol facilities and all those other ones that put off CO2 as well are going to have to manage this carbon sequestration. So at this point, it doesn't look favorable for us to be supportive of doing that. However, when the federal government says in order for everybody to be able to get down to net zero for the entire country, carbon sequestration is going to have to be in the mix. Now, whether that's on Prairie State or some other project somewhere down the line, that remains to be seen. The coal mine, I think in a macro basis, I think what you're getting at is what's the cost of decommissioning the coal mine. Mm-hmm. And we have recently done a decommissioning study at Prairie State about a year ago. So again, it's a year old. But again, you're making forecast for what a decommissioning cost of something would be in 2046. So you're making an assessment for what will something cost to do 24 years from now. Again, 2022 to 2046. What will it cost to do that? The preliminary number and the type of decommissioning that at least I am interested in, I think majority of our that our members are interested in, and the owners of Prairie State are what's called a greenfield decommissioning, where you basically take the soil back down to farmable, a farm field, if you will, and not leaving a empty building, not leaving it down to the concrete pads, taking it down to a green field. There's retire in place, there's brownfield, which leaves the stubs, or there's a green field that takes it down below the soil so you could farm the ground. That's the number I'm looking at. That anticipated number is in the range of about $160 million. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But again, IMEA owns 15% of Prairie State. Well, 15% of $160 million is $24 million. And we have 24 years to collect that much money. Now we have 22 years to collect that much money. So on a nominal basis, that's about $1 million a year, not assuming any interest gained while you're collecting that decommissioning fund in advance of that. So what that ends up being is about, round terms, without any interest, is about $1 million a year. Our budget this year is $355 million. So when you factor in the estimated cost of not only our Prairie State, but our Trimble County asset, and again, on a real high pro forma basis at Trimble County, Louisville Gas and Electric, Stacy mentioned LG&E, Louisville Gas and Electric is a proven operator of, at one point they had 14 different coal-fired power plants in Kentucky. I think they're down to 10 or 11 now. They have experience of decommissioning plants there as well. Between the two of them, we're anticipating, if we start that collection of those decommissioning funds over the next couple of years, it's less than 1% on our power rate. Because if you think about it, it's $1 million a year out of a $355 million budget. It's a relatively small amount, And so it's like that's like I explained to our staff members is, I suppose it's like planning for retirement or your kid's college education. How much are you going to need? I don't know, but it's a lot. The sooner you start, the better, and the more time you've got, and the interest, you know, the compounding interest of that over time, it looks like we could probably start to collect those funds. Again, I mentioned things about your pure power supply cost is somewhere in the range of $70 a megawatt hour, 7 cents a kilowatt hour. It would maybe take you to $71 per megawatt hour. So it's something that is not, it's not zero, it's not free, but it's something that is prudent for us and our partners to be planning, to be setting that aside, to make sure that when it's time, whenever that is, that there's enough funds there to be able to decommission this, put it back to the soil where it was before, and move forward on that basis. And again, that was a study that was independently done by international consulting engineers that have gone through the Monte Carlo analysis and all those other things that's gone along with that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I just have one other question. As an IME member, is the city of St. Charles going to be responsible if any of these projects that are projected, if we renew, is there a financial obligation or financial responsibility if projects go over budget? So things like, you know, any of the things that you have planned. And the reason that I asked this was from a recent article in the Tribune where they talked about how the Peabody shifted all the costs, the cost overages to IMEA. And I know our residents are a little concerned about how those things can happen and what kind of financial obligations that puts on the city.
Well, I'm very well aware of that story in the Chicago Tribune. What I can tell you is that Peabody did not shift all those costs to the IMEA. There was cost overruns from that project from what was anticipated back in the 2007, 8, 9 timeframe. And from a construction standpoint, when Katrina hit the United States and the cost of metal and the cost of steel and labor and all those other things during that period of time, I was actually involved in building another coal-fired power plant in central Nebraska at the same time. We saw the very same things that were happening at that point in time. So the quick answer to your question is St. Charles partially responsible for cost overruns for a project that costs more than it anticipated to begin, that anticipated to begin in the first place? The answer I think is yes. You're roughly 13% of the load that's there. If a project comes in at 10% more than it was anticipated, then you would pay again, it's a postage stamp rate. Your 13% of the load ratio share, if it costs 10% more, you get to pay, I'm not going to try to do the math here, but you get to pay 13% of that 10% cost overrun. Likewise, if IMEA does something better, cheaper, more efficient, you're the benefactor of that 13% benefit, which is what you've seen on some of those more recent years when our power cost has actually gone down, when most of the other power costs have gone up around the country. The year of 2022, many of you are served at, and again, we're in the natural gas business as well. We're a wholesale supplier of natural gas. When natural gas went to $9 a decatherm, and your home and business bill got about 2 or 3 times higher than what it was, those costs had to be passed along to the customers to be able to recover those costs for additional gas costs. And some of that had to do with the Storm Uri thing from 2021 of getting caught up on that one as well. So it was kind of a double whammy there. So yes, in the case of a public entity, no different than if you're doing a sewage treatment plant or whatever the case is, if there's a 10% cost overrun that's specifically for St. Charles, the citizens of St. Charles are responsible for their share of those costs. But again, part of that demonstrated capability over the last 40 years shows that we've done a good job of keeping those costs contained and keeping them stable or lower than they were the year before. We're 5% cheaper than we were 10 years ago. Again, I recognize that red line on the transmission costs continue to get higher. I guess rhetorically I would say if you think the cost of transmission is going to get cheaper in the next 10 years, it ain't. It's going to get significantly higher. And Pete and Gio and Paul and your team knows how much more transformers cost, how much wires cost, how much breakers cost, how much new transformers cost. There's significant growth in those costs of the business, which has helped drive up the cost of not just the power supply business, it's helped also driving up the cost of operating a distribution system as well. And those costs have to be passed along to your ratepayers. But your rates have been very, very stable for a long period of time.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Right.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it. So I'm going to just quickly go through some things here. It's awfully warm in here, so I'll go quick as I can. So to piggyback off of my colleague Jamie's question about carbon capture, there was a solicitation of interest from Prairie State last year on that, and I understand you said that you have no interest in owning it or operating it. It would be a third party. However, that plant or facility would be on Prairie State's property, right? Am I correct by saying that?
Yeah, we would
Okay.
we would make an agreement for them to lease that land and that type of thing.
Okay, so my question is the liability that comes with that, with the property, with the carbon capture plant being on Prairie State property, land, where we own a 13% stake, and then I look at the contract that you have with cost causation, you know what I'm saying? If something were to happen, and let's say 20 municipalities say, you know what, we want to do carbon capture, and the remaining municipalities say we do not, are we liable if we say we don't want to be involved with that at all, under the cost causer, or would it just be the 20 municipalities?
Everybody would be, again, no different, for example, if there's a vote here to do Project X, and the vote is 7-3 for the project to move forward, then the project would move forward, and if that cost was higher than was expected, then everybody in the community would pay for that. But to go back to the Prairie State situation, we own 15% of that project. And so part of the struggle with trying to be able to acquire somebody that's interested in doing that and taking all those liability and those risks and financial obligations that are out there is the indemnification of us if something were to happen on that land. And so that requires letters of credit, corporate endorsements, all those other things that go along with that to be able to make that happen.
No, I understand. It just seems to conflict with what's written in the contract. So when you have member-directed resources, if somebody says, you know what, I want to do this, and there's economies of scale with 20 municipalities say, you know what, we want to undertake carbon capture, and there's a cost cause or cost causation, and we, the elected body, say, you know what, we're not interested in pursuing that because of liability, or maybe that's not the direction we want to go as a community. That's where I'm a little confused on that when it's on our land, on where we have an ownership. That, you know, if we didn't have ownership in the land, I guess that would be a little bit different, but we own it. So once it's on there, there is a liability, unless there's an indemnification. And then also there's regulations that come out of Springfield, that, you know, out of DC, that are constantly changing. What are those liabilities to us as a community? And that is my concern, is the risk associated, the assumed risk associated with that may cost us. In a way, it all boils down to rates.
Yeah, but
it
gets down to everything is a risk-reward scenario, okay? And Brian, I'm relatively comfortable that if St. Charles said we don't want to burden the risk of the indemnification, because ultimately, when it comes to if there's a carbon sequestration machine built at Prairie State, that's ultimately the Prairie State Board would ultimately approve that item. Your 13% of IMEA is 15% of that project. And so in that case, and I don't think we're the only one, I know we're not the only ones that have these concerns that I just alluded to. That's why we haven't taken any action on this, that if the IMEA said it was voted 8-1 at Prairie State to move forward, then we would have to take some legal action injunctive action to stop that project or to be able to carve ourselves out of that. And if that's the decision that we and the board makes to do that, that would happen. But to have that on an individual city council's decision to do that, that's 2 layers up from a city council's decision. The IMA board would give us that direction, whether they wanted to support that. Peter would be your representative to do that. And clearly you would say, at this point, from your perspective, is we should not do this under any circumstances. But again, I don't know what's going to change 3 weeks from now or 3 years from now about some new technology that happens. I don't know.
Is that something that the IMEA can negotiate and get that placed in this new contract, that we will not pursue carbon capture? Is that something that you're willing to do? To at least inquire about it? Could you at
that's
least?
That's something I'm more than happy to have that discussion with the board members. What I would say, Brian, is again, if the EPA is saying the only way that a thermal generator will run beyond 2040 is to have a carbon capture machine on it, this is something that's going to have to happen in the United States between now and 2040. And again, if that holds up, for that to happen. But again, my sense is right now, without that in there, there have been 20 communities that have already approved this, and they know they have a vote and a voice in IMEA. And if the consensus, and my guess is, Troy and Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong, if we put that to a vote of the IMEA board right now with the information they have, they wouldn't support it either. I'm pretty sure. Right.
You think it doesn't make sense? The reason you studied it, that's the reason we reviewed it. Every utility is having to review our options to meet the EPA obligation that's through their planning. And right now, it doesn't make sense.
But to say that we would never do carbon sequestration in a contract that ends in 2055 seems to be something that may preclude an opportunity that would create less risk and more stability in the rates.
So it sounds like in the contract that it's going to be reviewed. It's kind of like a living document, as you say, right? So it's going to be reviewed every 3 to 5 years.
No, this is now the contract is a long-term contract.
So it's a contract.
The sustainability plan is a living document.
So once this document is signed, there are no changes permitted in this document.
So long as whoever signs that document altogether agrees, and again, your city attorney would probably acknowledge this, that if there's a change to the actual document itself, then all of the original signatories have to agree to that. And that has happened in the past.
Okay. So I'm just trying to get some clarity on the complex ownership of all of this. It's just like there's like layers, and I'm trying to just educate myself on this. So the owners, there's bonds that end in 2035, is that correct? So then it's paid off, basically. Okay. The purchase contract ends in 2035, correct? Okay. And then the ownership agreement in the actual property, coal mine, whatever, when does that end, or does it ever end, or how? That's the part I'm confused about.
Troy,
like I don't understand.
I can speak to that, but Troy was involved in the negotiations of that, and I can go ahead.
Okay.
The answer is it's ownership, just like your house. If your house became a nuisance, and I assume you live here in St. Charles.
Yeah.
If your home had a big sinkhole and became a nuisance, and the city required you to clean it up, you'd be responsible. Your ownership doesn't go away just because you want to walk away and abandon it.
What is the process for a municipality to say, hey, you know what, we explored other options and we want to take a different direction? What is the process for them to exit the IMEA contract? If they say, hey, you know what, we don't want ownership, do they sell it? How does that work? I'm like confused on how that works.
The city of St. Charles does not have ownership your name's not on any deed for Prairie State. Your name's not in the participation agreement for Prairie State. The name on that document is IMEA. IMEA is the owner of those assets.
Okay.
You are a member of IMEA. The membership agreement is separate and apart from the power sales contract. There is a statutory process to follow if you want to withdraw from membership in IMEA after your obligations to IMEA are done.
Okay.
And I can talk to your city attorney about it. I can
Yeah,
show him
I'm
where it's at
just
in the
curious
statute.
on the process because I've been asked the question and I don't know how to answer it.
Okay. Well, again,
I'm just trying to educate myself up here, like if we're exploring other options and kind of look at, I don't know, I'm just trying to understand how all of this works. So the other thing is CEJA. They have obviously statutory requirements you need to accomplish certain things at a certain deadline and things like that. And I asked this question before, is there something in the contract, can you put something in there that has some sort of incremental bump up and it can be very flexible, doesn't have to be specific to any sort of renewable or anything like that, to meet the statutory requirement of the Illinois statute, the CEJA Act? Is that something you can do? Say, hey, it's we're going to shoot between 2 and 5% every year to have some sort of renewable to get. You're going to have to get to that point regardless. So
what that may,
of net zero.
What that would potentially require then is that, let's just say we said that for each of the next 20 years before CEJA in 2045, we're going to grow 5% per year to get to that 100%, right?
Right.
So what that would require then is during certain years that IMEA didn't need any additional resources to serve your needs, then we would be required to go out and buy 5% more renewable energy than we need to serve your needs that aren't, you don't need it.
Right. But I'm just saying if there's some sort of language in the contract that says, you know what, we will meet the CEJA requirements, the statutory requirements, and obviously it's a legal right,
well,
the verbiage. I mean, is that something you can consider putting in there to?
You can rest assured that the IMEA will meet the statutory obligations from CEJA, or we will be subject to penalties and fines by the state of Illinois. That's the law. So EPA, there are Clean Air Act laws, there are state laws when it comes to compliance with environmental policy, regulatory policies, all those other things. The IMEA, and for that matter, all the utilities in the state will adhere to those things, or there will be financial consequences to that. To put something that's a given, for example, again, like a sewage treatment plant or whatever, that we will adhere to the EPA regulations, it's a given. We will do those things. And again, Brian, candidly, if the IMEA didn't adhere to those things and there was a fine or penalty or whatever, the first thing I'm sure Peter would say is, what the heck's going on here, guys? Why aren't we living up to the criterion that are out there? And I've had this question before, this discussion of having 2, 3, 4% per year is, resources don't come offline like a diet. They don't come off 2 or 3 pounds a week. They come up in chunks. So for example, in 2022, we lost 250 pounds, 250 megawatts of that coal baseload resource that we fought our way out of to get out of to acquire the Green River Wind Project, to get us to the point where we could acquire this 150 megawatts of solar. That, in this case, we're going faster than we'd anticipated to be able to get there. We've gone faster with regard to the behind-the-meter solar projects we've done, the state one we've done, and then, of course, the Green River project that's been online now for 5 years in anticipation of these goals. So, again, to say that we're going to have a goal that we're going to lose 2 pounds a year or 5 pounds a year, these things come off in giant chunks, and so if and when there's a need to replace some of that capacity, some of that energy from those resources, it's IMEA's job, the staff's job, to go out and procure those things to adhere to all of the state and the federal laws moving forward.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned that the rates are projected to decrease roughly by 25% when the bonds are paid in 2035. That's great. Everybody likes lower rates. Are you including the cleanup costs and things of that nature, all the reinvestment to get to where we need to be? Is that included in that projection, or is it kind of an estimate at this point?
We have not yet included that roughly dollar per megawatt hour of the decommissioning cost, but with regard to the cleanup or decommissioning of the assets we have on a pro forma basis, those are the only costs that we can expect is the ones I just outlined to.
Sure. And those have to be anticipated to go into this 25%.
Yeah, so
at some point.
Instead of that savings being 25%, it's more like 24%.
Okay. And then the other question I have is, you mentioned that if you go out for the purchase agreement of 20 years, you're at roughly 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour, roughly, I think, in your presentation. Then if you're 10 years, you're 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour. How does that compare to, because I have no comparisons, like how does that compare to other options out there?
Well, again, it all depends on where you're at. You know, if you ask me how much does 150 megawatts of solar cost in the desert, it's probably, well, it depends on how close the transmission lines are, but it should be cheaper to be able to do that. For example, a wind farm in West Texas is cheaper than a wind farm is in Western Illinois, because there's more wind to be able to do that.
Sure.
So what I can tell you is the cost of the solar, the cost of the wind that we procured 5 years ago is dramatically cheaper. It's about half of what the going price is right now. I will also tell you the project that we're looking at right now is about, say, 10 to 15% cheaper than what a lot of those same vendors are selling to the Illinois Power Agency at this point in time. Because as we were talking with this vendor, I said, I'm concerned about your price. And he said, yeah, I know, that we've had all the things, the supply chains and the transmission and the cost of money and insurance. The insurance for solar panels over the last 2 years, I've heard a couple of vendors tell me their insurance costs have gone up 140%. You get a big hailstorm and all of a sudden you got to replace that thing, and it's a not only a big challenge to replace it, now you're out that much power for that period of time. So again, comparing it to other people in this area, our procurement costs have been less, which is why our rates are less than other people.
One more question and I'm done. Is what role does nuclear play in your portfolio, and how are you looking at that in the future?
We're interested in nuclear. There's been one nuclear generator built in the United States, large nuclear generator built in the United States in the last 30 years, 25 or 30 years. A Vogtle plant down in Georgia. To give you some indication, that project has a 50-year bond on it. So again, our bonds were paid off in 23 years, from 2012 to 2035. So it's like your house. If you have a 50-year mortgage as opposed to a 23-year mortgage, your 50-year mortgage payment's going to be less, but you're going to pay more over time. So with a 50-year mortgage on those nuclear plants, their busbar cost is about double what your power supply cost is today.
Okay. All right, great.
And so part of what our job is to make sure that, for example, I guess, Brian, for me or for you, if my power bill doubled, I wouldn't like it, but would it change my life? It wouldn't change my life. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I have a huge amount of customers in our footprint that if we double our power bills, it would change their life. And so that's something that we're mindful of. For example, the other thing that's been recently looked at was small modular nuclear. Mm-hmm. They were looking to do one in the Idaho test lab. Our peers in Utah, the Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems, everybody's got I'll use your thing, they have UAMPS. You give me the energy thing. UAMPS had looked at doing that after a $1.4 billion subsidy that was guaranteed by the DOE to do that. They had significant cost escalation. At first, they thought that number was $53 a megawatt hour. And I'm relatively sure if I came to the city council and said, would you be interested in doing a $53 per megawatt hour busbar cost for a brand new carbon-free technology, we're definitely in. As they got closer and closer to when they started putting the numbers together, they had 45 days to decide. It went from $53 to $89. Are you still in? I got 45 days to decide. And during that 45 days, the developers came back and said, 89 might not be enough. And at that point, the UAMPS utilities said, we're going to pass for now. So that's the cost standpoint. I was at a workshop through American Public Power Association about a year and a half ago now, and one of the leading advocates for nuclear generation was there, the Nuclear Association of the United States, and I asked her about, I'm interested in this technology. Can you tell me what the bus bar cost would be? She didn't want to, he was up on a microphone, she didn't want to get into that because of confidentiality things. I understand that. But I said, I understand that. And she said, well, it's probably going to be not as high as what I just said. It's not as low as what you're paying today. But I also said then, what I'm really primarily interested in is not what model number 1 cost, is how long would it take for model 1 to be proven so that models 2, 3, 5, and 6 could be developed. And when is that a realistic time frame? This was back when they were planning to build this thing and have it online 4 years from now, which is not happening now. And she said probably commercial operation date at best is somewhere between 2038 and 2040, which realistically that's not a huge amount of time considering that technology. We get, model number 1 of anything, you want to make sure it works right. And so practicality is, do I think that IMEA would be definitely interested in nuclear generation? This state has had a good history of nuclear generation. As much as I'd like to potentially buy into some of the Constellation nuclear plants, they're not selling them.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So again, it's something that it's possible, but at the same time, it's still a ways away.
Steve, Bob, anything? Steve,
Good.
Good. Peter, do we have the questions? And is there anything that didn't get covered? That we covered a lot of ground, but I just want to make sure there's an opportunity if a question got posed that somebody up here didn't ask.
So Pete gave them to me. I'm going to try to put them together. So there were 2 questions with regards to bonds and the fact that when the bonds are retired, they gave some examples. Will there be a need for new bonds, such as for the utility scale solar, for transmission ownership, or for upgrades with the aging Prairie State Power Plant? So that's the question there. The second question is on carbon capture. That's already been answered.
Okay, so with regard, that's a great question. With regard to, do we anticipate any bond, we pay off our houses in 2035. Do we anticipate any additional bonds that will be needed to develop the next set of resources? At this point in time, the way the tax law works is the incentives, right now it's more cost effective to buy purchase power agreements from large developers because they have a tax credit appetite. We're a not-for-profit. We don't have a tax appetite. A couple of years ago, Congress passed what was called direct pay for public power utilities. That was a battle we thought we fought and won. And in fact, we were just on a conference call today talking about the Treasury has still not come out with a clear policy for how tax-exempt entities can enjoy those credits. And so right now, it is still much more cost-effective to do purchase power agreements, and therefore there's no debt obligations on them. But it is a payment obligation for the agency to pay, and for heaven's sakes, where does the money from the agency come from? From the members that we serve to be able to do that. And so in the longer term, could IMEA come back to St. Charles and all the other members that are members of IMEA and say, we've got an opportunity to put a battery in, a solar project in, and based on the new math, the way it works, it's cost advantageous for it to own it ourselves. If and when IMEA would decide to go issue bonds, couldn't issue those bonds beyond 2055 for that resource, based on the contract that we're looking at, I don't know why I'm looking at you, Brian, you're asking that question. But it couldn't go beyond that 2055 at this point, but it's something that each one of our communities, we'd be coming back to you and say, there's going to be a bond obligation on this, in addition to the payment obligations for the resources that are already there in the purchase power agreements. And that when we would go, and I will just tell you right now, that next spring, the IMEA will be coming back to our municipalities to issue some new bonds. However, I want to make this clear, those bonds would only be between 2025 and 2035. So there's a what's called a 10-year par call in the bond business. Once you've had bonds for 10 years and you can go out and refinance them at a cheaper rate, we have the ability but not the obligation to do that. Most logical people says, well, aren't the interest rates more expensive now than they were 10 years ago? They are, but that short term, the 10-year bonds as opposed to the 30-year bonds, the 10-year bonds still appear to be cheaper. We'll be coming back to you. The plan would be probably next April, going through with our board to look at refinancing that. Our preliminary number is we think we can save potentially $25 to $30 million over the next 10 years to our existing ratepayers for refinancing the remainder of the bonds that are still there. Doesn't create any additional obligation financial to those that don't go beyond 2035. It just refinances that house for that last 10 years. So, but again, if in 2000, Stacy will still be here. Troy, he ain't going to be here as much as he says he's going to be here. But in 2045, if the board decides that it's in the best interest of the agency and the members that we serve to go issue new bonds, that's a process and a project that would come through the board, and there would be a number of documents that your legal counsel, your bond counsel, all those other things would work your way through, just like you've done the several times you all have been involved in those bond refinancings and the bond issuance we did before. But that's a great question. Carbon capture, we'd already talked about.
Yeah, the next one to me, it's on the sustainability plan. This is from Debbie Mader. She wanted to know, how did St. Charles have a voice in the sustainability plan since our city council did not see the plan until after it was approved? So I just want to kind of walk back through briefly the explanation. So we're representative government. Similar to you represent all of your residents in your ward. Pete represents the city of St. Charles. We had a working group that formed that from our member municipalities, and we did present it in an open public meeting that we follow all of the OMA requirements and everything. And then we didn't even vote on it at that time. We rarely vote on anything the first time. I can count on one hand how many times that's happened. We go forward, we present it, we come back at the next board meeting, which is 2 months later, and then we take a vote. So that is the voice, is through our board. Our board directs everything we do. As I mentioned, there's going to be a stakeholder process 3 years from now, and so you as a city can determine how you want to get that feedback from your residents to bring to our board in the next round. And honestly, it's a living, breathing document. If there's some urgent matter between now and then, Pete can bring any issue to the board at any point in time. Our board works well together, and they work together to collaborate to make things happen. The second question was a similar vein. How will St. Charles residents and ratepayers have a voice in deciding that path forward to diversify our portfolio after the bonds are paid? And I would give the exact same answer there, which is this representative government fashion, which we look to our board to bring to us the voice of the community. To that point, the question is, and I think this has been asked before, but to whom does Pete Stewart have a fiduciary duty when he's sitting on the IMEA board, the City of St. Charles or IMEA? Obviously, he has a fiduciary duty to both. He's a board member of IMEA. He's obviously clearly working for your city and represents your city in that representative board. The other question from Betsy was back to kind of the same question that we had originally, like, are we going to use bonds to do plant capital improvements? I think you already said no to that. Wanting to know about the coal supply and when that's going to be exhausted. You want to talk about?
Yeah, when the project was built in 2012, reserves that were proven for 30 years of operation, so a full-scale operation. So logic would tell you if you ran it full out from 2012 to 2042, you'd likely be running out of coal in 2042. However, a machine like that doesn't run 100% of the time. It has to take down maintenance outages, it has forced outages and the like, and so in that period, it likely would be in that 2044, 2045 timeframe. However, considering that with CEJA, that 45% of the output of those power plants have to be curtailed in the middle of no later than the end of the middle of 2038, then 45% of the coal that would be used to generate that power will not be used then. That's likely to get us to 2046, which takes us to the end of that useful life of that thing, and then that's even a bigger hurdle or consideration to overcome for if, for example, the development said maybe Prairie State, because the RTOs and the state says you need to keep that thing going to ensure reliability, it would have to go procure other coal besides what's at that project. And today, our permit says only coal that we can use unless it's an emergency condition is from the Lively Grove mine, which is the mine that Prairie State owns. So it ties together pretty closely with the time frame that the CEJA has it on. And again, to me, the thought that beyond 2046 that Prairie State would be lasting a significant longer time than that seems pretty remote. But at the same time, we need a lot of new technology to be able to ensure that long-term reliability and stability of the system between now and 2045.
Okay, I think what you just commented, the last question there is that if they had asked about the bonds, we answered that. The third question was if the law changes, will IMEA commit to closing as currently scheduled? You just talked about that. And the fact that the coal and how much coal is there, and then also the reliability obviously is primary if there's some issue there with reliability. Let's see, we already did the bonds. That was carbon capture. So let me make sure I got everything. There's one last one. Another question about carbon capture. I feel like we've covered that. Well, I mean, I vote no on adding carbon capture. We talked about the fact that our board currently doesn't think that it's economical, but we could, in the long term, potentially, I suppose for a regulatory reason, need to pursue it. Smart planning is to review all your options before you, but we're not going to recommend something that doesn't make any economic sense. We're all municipalities, we're all nonprofit. That would drive all your decision. The last question, I think, and I'll double check this one, but this is to you, Kevin. So it talks about how the last item in our portfolio presentation was hedges, and the question from Bill Kale is this how we actually keep our prices reliable? So.
No, that is not how we keep our prices reliable. The hedges that we've made thus far have been, again, as I said before, to bridge to get out of that 250 megawatt coal baseload resource project that we did in 2022. Rather than risking not having those hedges put out there, fortunate enough, we did have those hedges out there that we had some hedges, and I don't remember the prices off the top of my head, but when we locked in some of those capacity hedges during that period of time was when the MISO market went from a very low number to a number that was 47 times higher. It went from $5 a megawatt day to $237 a megawatt day in 1 year. And we had all but about 30 megawatts of our 1,200 megawatt obligations hedged already. And so the other thing that it's done is we've gone out and procured, and again, some of that was from a large nuclear generator you might be familiar with, and some of that energy came from a large nuclear generator you might be familiar with during the summer season, and those prices were higher than the average cost of our fleet to begin with, but because we locked those in knowing that we wanted to have 25 megawatts on peak during the months of July and August, during Monday through Friday during the on-peak hours at a reasonable price, that hedge, which is by the nature of the word, mitigates against the risk of having that situation happen that I mentioned about Christmas of 2022. If you're not hedged, you're subject to having $2,000, $3,000 per megawatt hour if that happens. I'll give you another example is down in Oklahoma. One of our peers had not been hedged during that Storm Uri of 2021. That was the President's Day of 2021 storm event we had that everybody remembers, Texas freezing off. That has significant ripple effects throughout the entire Midwest, all the way up into Illinois as well. One of our peers is about half of our size. They had not had those hedges put in place, and it cost them $110 million. Even with the budget of $355 million, if you spent $110 million more in a month than you thought, it's going to have a long-term lasting effect negatively on your members' prices. So us hedging our resources have not been as cost-effective as the rest of our resources. But to me, after all the years I've been doing this, and the people that are involved in resource planning and hedging, it's prudent utility practice to make sure that if you know what your costs are and you can budget for those costs, and there's force majeure items out there, then I'm sure that your attorney could talk about force majeure items as well if they can't produce. But all of our hedges came in, they lived up to what they said they were going to do, and they actually helped keep our prices stable. But the hedging has not saved us money. It's stabilized the risk of that volatility.
The last one, and this is, I think, in my area, it talks about, it says, this is from Bill Kale, I believe it's pronounced Kale. The sustainability plan is mostly coal until 2045-50. Can we replace any of that with renewable energy and storage? So just to clarify, Happy Prairie State, it's not all coal till that long. I think we talked about the fact that we're adding in solar now. We're going to continue to add it. And we're obviously going to be replacing that 45% Happy Prairie State in that 2035 to 38 time range. And the commitment in the sustainability plan is to replace that with renewable energy. So there is that commitment there. And then in addition, again, we're a nonprofit. And so if it doesn't make economic sense and we don't need, if there is a new technology that develops and we don't need that baseload coal, I mean, we're nonprofit. We're going to get rid of it. We're not a coal company making money off of this, right? It's a diversified portfolio to make sure you're reliable and affordable. And so if it doesn't make sense into the future and we are able to do small modular reactor nuclear, whatever might be available, and do it in a way that makes sense, we're going to take that action. Obviously, I'm assuming that's what the board, that's what they've given us the indication they want to do. So that's what we would do. That, I think, I just checked with Pete on a couple of the others that aren't exactly the same, but the same topics we've covered. So we feel like we've attended to the questions. So appreciate your time again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me wrap this up. Again, let me echo what Stacy said. If the technology, if by 2035, there's a technology that comes around that says we can ensure that you can ramp generators up and down to match the load, you can store it for much more cost effectively than we can right now. And it creates more reliability and a lower cost, and we can shut down all of the thermal generation we have. We don't have any financial incentive to do it other than what's in your financial and reliability best interest, and we will do that. Again, as we've talked about, that technology doesn't exist today that can make those three-legged stool continue to stand up. And so one of the things that, there's a number of utilities out there that have much older, whether they're coal, gas, nuclear generators that are out there. If they all felt they could do this with renewable energy and have 100% renewable energy to power your communities, they would already be doing that. There are no utilities that actually can run 8,760 hours a year with no carbon emissions. And so we will continue to work feverishly to try to get you the best possible price, the highest reliability, to be sustainable, and to adhere to all the federal and state obligations that are out there, just like you do every day. Again, the low-cost supply, we are very focused on the Illinois municipal utilities, what's in our members' best interest. We have created a slew of services that are tailored just for you to help you take care of your customers better, so that you're more focused on those customers. And there's a number of things we do with your staff, and you have a great staff, that creates benefits for your customers for today and for the long term. We believe that you having that voice in the long term is the best thing you can do that keeps your options open, just like you've been in the business since 1892 in the electric business. You're a nonprofit, we're a nonprofit, we're focused on doing the right things, you're focused on doing the right things. We'd like to have you continue to work with us over the next 20 or 30 years, as Ron alluded to earlier. We're looking forward to answering any additional questions you have to follow up. And with that, I do have a couple of annual reports. Again, they're all out on the website. I've got a couple of hard copy annual reports. If you'd like to take a look at that, happy to do that as well. So with that,
thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Stacy.
Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Troy.
With that, we're going to move along to item 5B, recommendation to approve a resolution to authorize issuing a purchase order to Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, Inc. for substation equipment. Mr. Hopkins.
Good evening.
Good
late
evening.
evening. So this has all been in the budget. We've got SCL relays in our substations as part of the control mechanism, the safety, the reclosures, all of that. They need upgrading. They've been outdated. Some are failing. So we went into the budget trying the first substation to get it done and consolidated in a standard, if you will, with new programs, new equipment by SCL. And that's taking place this current year right now. And we're now in the next fiscal year coming up. It's the next substation. The one we're doing now is right behind us here on 3. This one's the big one, commercial CMD out there for substation 5. It was already proposed in the budget. It's always been approved. We just want to release the product now. That's what this resolution is asked for.
Move for approval. Second.
Moved by Brian, second by David. Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 All right, thank you. That passes. Item 5C, a recommendation to approve a resolution to authorize issuing of purchase orders to Badger Meter, Inc. for Badger AMI water meter equipment.
Right, same sort of scenario. You know, this is a long-range plan of several years. This is the next batch of meters to purchase, so we can start implementing them as soon as it can go online. You know, the water meters, we've got a lot that can't be read. We're losing revenue from all of that. So this was already in the budget. It's already approved that way, but we'd like approval of resolution to go ahead and start releasing them.
Move for approval.
Second.
Moved by Jamie, second by David.
I can't know. Give it
Roll
to
call.
Bob.
Oh, I got one question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ron.
No, this
Actually,
is Ron.
Ron. Sorry, David Trey.
Are we going to be replacing the water meters, or are water meters already set up for all this?
It's new water meters, new registers on to go up.
All the we will all be getting new water meters?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so moved by Jamie, second by David. Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 All right, that passes. Thank you. Item 5D, presentation of 2024 bicycle and pedestrian improvements.
Good evening. We passed the St. Charles Bike and Pedestrian Plan in the fall of 2023, and I just wanted to give you a quick update as we enter our first fiscal year of this program as to what projects we will be taking part in. The plan for the first year is to do the low-hanging fruit projects. That's to build momentum, get things going, keep the excitement going from the plan getting past itself. So the plan contains many very important, larger scale, long scale projects. I don't have the graphic up, but we will have it on the website tomorrow. So there's a map that shows and describes all of these, and we'll get it up on the website under the bike and pedestrian plan. So the plan, the bike and pedestrian plan contains many projects that are bigger, long-scale projects that require a lot of coordination. I've received questions specifically about the Campton Road connection between Peck and Oak Street. This is a great example of a long-term project with right-of-way acquisition and design and potential grants. Those aren't the sort of projects we're looking for this year. This year we're focusing on the low-hanging fruit. This is minimal design, no right-of-way acquisition, no parking elimination, work that can be incorporated into projects that we already have ongoing, and quick implementation. So the first set of projects is to put striping down on the road. We're talking sharrows, the bikes with chevrons above them, on all of the routes that are already designated bike routes in town, sharrows as well as bike route signs. We're also putting sharrows on a number of important connector routes that were identified in the plan or identified through user data. One thing to note is that there are a lot of these streets that are in our have been identified for resurfacing in the next couple of years. We are not going to be putting any new sharrows down on roads that are resurfaced in the next 2 to 3 years. For example, Fox Chase, we put bike lanes on as part of last year's roadway program. We're looking at resurfacing the remainder of Fox Chase over the next 2 to 3 years, so we don't want to stripe it just to mill it all off to restripe it. So those sorts of projects are on our list but aren't being done at this time. Our second set of projects, we received grant money from the DCEO for bike and pedestrian improvements, and we're using that to improve 6 intersections that were identified in the bike and pedestrian plan as high volume intersections. We'll be adding rectangular rapid flashing beacons to each of these intersections. We're currently working through design and IDOT permitting, and we're hoping to get those installed in the spring. Our third set of projects are things that are involved in other construction projects that we have ongoing. As part of the water main project out on Prairie, we're looking at installing a pedestrian refuge island at 14th and Prairie to assist people getting across that busy street. As part of the Route 25 culvert project, we'll be realigning the pedestrian crossing at Route 25. And as part of the Couts Road widening and reconstruction project that is ongoing right now, we'll be connecting the side path, the bike and pedestrian trail, from the Prairie Path all the way up to Commerce Drive, finishing up that key connection as part of that project. The fourth item that we are going to be doing is actually item 5I on our agenda tonight. It's a phase 1 and phase 2 study for a mid-block crossing on Illinois Street, just west of the bridge. This is a key connector where pedestrians and bicyclists want to cross Illinois Street to get to the new plaza, but they don't necessarily want to go back and forth between the light. And so we're doing a feasibility study to make sure that we can safely create a crossing there and figure out what that crossing should look like, and then doing design for that with the hopes of constructing it early next year. In the future, we plan on working with consultants to continue pursuing grant money to start looking into some of these larger projects and figuring out when we can get those budgeted. And also we plan on incorporating bike and pedestrian plans, complete street elements into our construction projects as we can throughout the coming years. But for now, hopefully this focus on the low-hanging fruit will keep the momentum going. It'll keep people excited and just promote bicycling in St. Charles. Any questions?
Yeah. No, thanks for this summary. Moving forward, though, is it possible, I know this group isn't, I don't believe it's not really meeting anymore, but you didn't consult, or could you consult, I guess, moving forward? There was sort of an ad hoc pedestrian committee that existed. Some of the members, would you be able to just consult with them, I guess, moving forward when going into these next phases?
Sure. We don't have a
unless you wanted to add something, Chris, I know that we've had some inquiries about that as well. The intent of the pedestrian plan was to form that committee for the purposes of completing the plan itself. And then subsequent to that, we have a delineated list of items to tackle based on categories of those, and those will always be subject to approved budget funding from the city council. So there's not necessarily a need for that. We make staff recommendations based on the projects that are already ongoing in the current budget year, as well as additional direction from city council. So there's not a benefit to adding another committee to that.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Not going anywhere. Item 5E, a recommendation to approve a resolution authorizing a design engineering contract for Phase 2 design for 12th and Dean Stormwater Improvements Project.
State Street Creek has had a long history of flooding, and we've done a number of projects to help reduce that. The next step in reducing flooding as part of State Street Creek, we had a Phase 1 study done starting in 2022 to look at the intersection of 12th and Dean. That's a downstream intersection that is identified in our master plan for improvements to the entire system. This will, we're looking into a design to upsize pipe and reduce local flooding and increase overall system capacity. So I'm recommending that we approve HR Green to do a Phase 2 design, and as part of that we'll also be improving 12th Street, upsizing the water main, replacing aging sanitary sewer, and reconstructing the roadway.
Yeah.
I don't know if did you mention lead line replacements as well? Is that part of this
Yes.
project?
I didn't say it, but yes, that will be part of this project.
Is it multiple houses or just?
It will be multiple houses.
Okay, great, thank you.
Move for approval.
Second.
Moved by Jamie, second by Brian. Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 All right, thank you, that passes. 5F, we have a recommendation to approve a resolution to award the bid of the final clarifiers rehabilitation. Good evening.
Hello, sir. My item tonight is the rebuilding of the final clarifiers, the main plants by Public Works facility. The final clarifiers is your traditional big round tanks you see in an aerial of a wastewater plant. It's only made of 2 items, concrete and steel. All the steel has been underwater for well over 35 years and is basically rotting away. So this project is replace all the steel within the tanks. We did have 2 bids. The low bidder was slightly under budget, and the project is estimated to come in right about $1.9 million. Any questions?
Move for approval. Second.
Second.
Thank you.
You got that?
I got Bob's, but thank you. Moved by David, second by Bob. Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 All right, thank you, that passes. And then last but not least, item 5I, which we pulled off, a recommendation to approve a consultant contract for Phase 1 and 2, design for Illinois Avenue mid-block crossing. Do you want to?
I only pulled it off because it felt unusual to approve it before seeing the presentation that talked about it. So I don't know if you just want to give a brief, like you already talked about it for a second, but.
Yeah, so the idea is to create a mid-block crossing, to look into what that is. It's identified as a high priority location in the bike and pedestrian plan. So we want to do a Phase 1, Phase 2 study to get that going right away.
Move for approval.
Second.
Moved by Jamie, seconded by Brian. Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. Thank you, that passes. Item 6, public comments. Anybody would like to? Yes, Mr.
Wait a long time to come up here.
Just got to state your name.
Tom Anderson.
Thank you.
Been in town since 1942. Not as long as Mr. Sokaitis, maybe. Anyway, biking, we appreciate all the work you've done on the biking, but just to let you know, the committee that did a lot of volunteer time did not hear about this meeting tonight. So a number of us are here. We rode our bikes. Who rode our bikes today? Somebody? Okay. Anyway, there's a biker. Okay. We're promoting biking local, meaning coming to events like this, right? So, and if the street lights are working, then we're safe going home. Anyway, but also, all of us that rode bikes, did you find a proper bike rack to put here at the city? Who found one? There is not a bike rack at the city hall. Is there one?
Right out front.
Oh, way out on the
Right
street?
out in the front.
Oh, okay. It's out by 64. Very secure location.
Two of them? Two of them.
Anyway,
It's
there's nothing.
It's under a
that-
street light, Tom.
Oh, there's
Yes.
two? Excuse me. I stand corrected. It's here. But I threw it in today. I went into the building department. I said, I'm on my bicycle. Where can I park my bike on a bike rack? The building department let them know. They didn't think there was one anywhere. So, okay, sorry. I did my homework. I stand corrected, Mayor. There's out by 64 where there's nobody going by, no traffic. Okay, we're here late, so I am here primarily, but I expect to see a picture up there because I own a property, talk about bike trails, that goes from the river out to the Great Western. And if you come in on Dean Street, you go on State Street, and you come to Route 31, that's the bike trail. Going to be marked as so currently, but it's not shown, so maybe it's going to get changed before tomorrow, because I hope so. It shows that you make a left and you go on my property, because there's no bike trails going between State Street and the bridge. And I hope that doesn't give you history. The county had a line going through a number of years ago. I called the county and they immediately took it off their website because there's no trail there. And I'm concerned about people using it. It needs to become a wider sidewalk that can be done, but it's back to the budget to do that between State Street and the bridge. So I hope this does not show up on our plan, but you can't put Charles on top of private property, I don't think. The second area that's a big budget that is a problem, I think, is between the post office on 64 and going on the Campton Hills Road. There is no sidewalk and there's no bike trail. So anybody that lives in Harvest Hills and out in Renault Manor can't get to the post office unless they go north of 64, around 64 to Oak, and then come back. But there's bike trails on the map, you'll see them, but that is big bucks, guys, but it needs to get scheduled. And all the excuses I hear, oh, IDOT's so hard to work with. Well, I think I've heard of things like easy things get done fast, the impossible take a while. Well, nobody's done anything to have this become a bike trail. And I think that part of town is isolated from the rest of the Coranda Road. So the other thing I wore today is, last thing, is I'm advocating a safety committee of some kind that talks about bike safety in St. Charles, bike racks availability in St. Charles, and a lot of that can be done by you folks. It's not going to be citizens going. Pamphlets at the police station, whatever it takes, you can be doing that. So going forward, the one deal that I'm going to do is members of the myself and the committee, of which there's 3 or 4 in the room here, are going to meet, get some ideas down, pass them to Chris, and it'll be everything that does not increase your budget. How's that for you? Hey, I got a smile out of Chris. Okay, it won't increase his budget, but the citizens can have some realignment of ideas of what can be done in this building here. So thank you for that, but looking forward to more safer biking in St. Charles. And usually we get home before dark, but just to let you know, guys, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it. You got to have the proper lights. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Any additional items from council or mayor? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't get there quicker before.
There you go.
Just your name.
Adrian Anderson, I'll make this brief. Just thank you very much for doing the bicycle issues. I've lived in St. Charles for a long time, taught for years at Thompson Middle School, and recognize that every resident of St. Charles should have a safe and convenient way to go to the grocery store or to their school, to shop at our beautiful downtown businesses, to be able to enjoy the community and the area we have here. But not every area of town can actually get to the library or get to this building safely. So I would hope that you would be aggressive supporters for wheeled mobility in St. Charles, and maybe even more than just the paint. The paint is good, but the paint's probably not actually going to protect the bicyclist from a motor vehicle. But I would hope that it will be more than just when we get around to redoing the streets, that we would consider making biking more safe in St. Charles for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeff Motter, St. Charles resident and member of the Tri-Cities Energy Group. My comments are on the Integrated Resource Plan. I'm going to skip through some of my comments because you received information from our group, at least a couple pieces that are far more detailed than I would go into tonight. But what I did want to do is talk about the effectiveness of an integrated resource plan and its dependency on three factors. The first is its independent status. An IRP must be done by an expert who is not biased for or against IMEA. Inclusion of the stakeholder process. Governing bodies of IMEA's 32 members, their ratepayers, and members of the public must have the opportunity to provide input during the IRP process. And finally, a commitment to perform future IRPs on a recurring basis every 3 to 5 years. This is especially critical in the rapidly changing landscape of energy. So my final comment is just let's stabilize IMEA's three-legged stool by adding a fourth leg, accountability through the Integrated Resource Plan. This will provide you, the City Council, with the time and information you need to make an informed decision about our energy future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Hal Honeyman from the Bike Rack. A lot of familiar faces, and I want to just thank you for what you guys have done with bike trail development and just supporting cycling in St. Charles in general. It's made it, I think, a bright spot in cycling in the Midwest, so thank you. Chris answered my question, actually, regarding Campton Hills Road. This is phase one, and that's down the road. I drive that road every day from home to work and work to home, and when I see, a mom with a stroller do all these bags trying to negotiate that intersection, I cringe every time. So I just would suggest that project be pushed further up the ladder. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, so I will ask again, sorry, anything from council?
No, sir.
Anything from here? All right, I'm looking for a motion.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Brian, second Jamie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.